Star Wars, Jedi Apprentice, The Defenders of the Dead, by Jude Watson. Read for you by the Expanded Universe Lives Forever. Chapter 1. The starfighter darted closer to the surface of the planet Melita Dawn. On the rugged terrain below, vast structures made of ebony stone hugged the ground, laid out in enormous perfect squares without windows or doors. Obi-Wan Kenobi studied them through the view screen as he piloted the craft. "What do you think they are?" he asked Qui-Gon Jinn. "I've never seen anything like them." "I don't know," the Jedi Knight replied, studying the landscape with keen blue eyes. "Storage warehouses, perhaps, or military installations." "They could conceal tracking devices," Obi-Wan observed. "I'm not picking up anything on the scanner, but let's fly lower, just in case." Without slowing, Obi-Wan piloted the craft closer to the planet's surface. Rocks and vegetation rushed past the view screen. With the engines at full power, Obi-Wan kept a tight grip on the controls. One tiny adjustment could send them crashing. "If we fly any lower, I'll be able to do a molecular scan of the topsoil," Qui-Gon remarked dryly from the co-pilot's seat. "You're flying too low at this speed, Padawan. If we come across a stray boulder, we may end up making an unscheduled crash landing." His tone was mild, but Obi-Wan knew Qui-Gon would accept no argument. Obi-Wan is Qui-Gon's Jedi Apprentice, and one of the Jedi rules was not to question the order of a master. Reluctantly, Obi-Wan eased up slightly on the controls. The starfighter rose a few meters. Qui-Gon stared steadily ahead, still searching for a place to land. They were reaching the outskirts of Zihava, the main city on the planet of Melita Dawn, and it was crucial that their arrival be unnoticed. The bloody civil war in Melita Dawn had been raging for 30 years. It was a continuation of a conflict that had lasted for centuries. The two warring peoples, the Melita and the Dawn, couldn't even agree on a name for their planet. The Melita called it Melita, and the Dawn called it Dawn. In a compromise, the Galactic Senate used both names, separated by a slash mark. Every town and city on the planet was hotly contested, with territory taken and lost in a continuing series of battles. The capital city of Zihava was under siege much of the time, as the boundaries between Dawn and Melita constantly shifted. Obi-Wan knew that Jedi Master Yoda was depending on them for success in this mission. He had chosen carefully among the many Jedi. This mission was important to him. Weeks ago, one of his brightest pupils, the Jedi Knight Tal, had come to Melita Dawn as a guardian of peace. Tal was renowned among the Jedi Knights for her diplomatic skills. The two sides had been close to a settlement when war broke out again. Tal had been badly wounded and captured by the Melita. Just days ago, Yoda had succeeded in getting a message through to his original contact, a Melita named Wihudi. Wihudi had agreed to smuggle Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon into the city and help them to work for Tal's release. The mission ahead was more difficult and dangerous than usual, Obi-Wan knew. This time, the Jedi had not been invited to settle a dispute. They were unwelcome. The last Jedi envoy had been captured, perhaps killed. He glanced over at his master. Qui-Gon's calm, steady gaze swept the landscape ahead. He betrayed no agitation or worry that Obi-Wan could see. One of the many things Obi-Wan admired about Master Qui-Gon was his composure. He had wanted to become Qui-Gon's Padawan because Qui-Gon was well respected for his bravery, skill, and ability with the Force. Although they sometimes had their differences, Obi-Wan had a deep respect for the Jedi Master. "Do you see that canyon?" Qui-Gon asked, leaning forward and pointing. "If you can land between the walls, we can hide the starfighter there. It's a tight fit." "I can do it," Obi-Wan promised. Keeping his speed steady, he dipped down lower. "Slow down," Qui-Gon warned. "I can make it," Obi-Wan said, gritting his teeth. He was one of the better pilots of the Jedi Temple. Why did Qui-Gon always have to correct him? He zoomed into the small clearing with only a centimeter to spare. But at the last moment, too late, he saw that one of the cliffs had a small outcropping. A groaning sound filled the cockpit as the side of the ship scraped against it. Obi-Wan set the craft down and powered down the engines. He did not want to look at Qui-Gon. but he knew that being a Jedi meant taking responsibility for every mistake. He met his master's gaze squarely. He was relieved to see amusement in Qui-Gon's eyes. "At least we didn't promise to return the starfighter without a scratch," he said. Obi-Wan grinned. They had borrowed the transport from Queen Vita on the planet Gala, where they had successfully completed their last mission. As they climbed down from the starfighter onto the rocky terrain of Melita Dawn, Qui-Gon paused. "There is a great disturbance in the Force on this world," he murmured. "Hatred rules this place." "Yes, I feel it," Obi-Wan said. "We must be very careful here, Padawan. When so much volatile emotion is packed into a place, it is hard to keep your distance. Remember, you are a Jedi. You are here to observe and to help where you can. Our mission is to return Tal to the temple." "Yes, Master." The underbrush was thick and leafy, and it was easy to drag large branches and cover the starfighter. It would not be visible from the air. Shouldering their survival packs, the two Jedi headed toward the outskirts of Zihava. They had been instructed to approach from the west, where Huddy would meet them at a Melita-controlled gate. It was a dusty hike through hills and canyons. At last the towers and buildings of the walled city were before them. They had kept off the main road, keeping open country, and now they looked down at the city from a nearby cliff. Keeping low to the ground, Obi-Wan scanned the desolate outskirts of the city. He saw no people on the streets. There was only one entrance to the city on the main road. At the break in the thick wall a guardhouse stood, bristling with laser cannons trained on the road. Two tall deflection towers flanked the guardhouse. Behind the wall they could glimpse the buildings perched on the steep hills of the city. Close to the wall was a long, low building of black stone, with no windows or doors. "It's a smaller version of those square buildings we saw from the air," Obi-Wan observed. Qui-Gon nodded. "It could be a military building of some kind, and those deflection towers mean that there's a particle shield in place. If we attempt to enter without permission, we'll be blasted with laser fire." "What should we do?" Obi-Wan asked. "We don't want to approach unless we're sure Huddy is there." Qui-Gon dug in his survival pack for a pair of electro-binoculars. He trained them on a guardhouse. "I've got worse news," he said. "I see a Dawn flag. That means either the whole city is now controlled by the Dawn, or the entrance is." "And Huddy is a Melita," Obi-Wan groaned, "so there's no way in." Qui-Gon scuttled back to remove himself from sight. He slid the electro-binoculars back into his pack. "There is always a way, Padawan," he said. "Huddy told us to approach from the west. If we follow the perimeter, we might find an unguarded area. Perhaps he's on the lookout. Once we're away from that guard tower, we can get closer." Keeping to the cover of the shadow of the cliffs, Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon made their painstaking way around the city's walls. When they were out of the guardhouse's sight, they moved closer. Qui-Gon's keen eyes swept every meter of the wall, searching for a break. Obi-Wan knew he was using the Force to test the way ahead, hoping to sense a break in the particle shield. Obi-Wan tried to do the same, but he could only feel glimmers of resistance. "Wait," Qui-Gon said suddenly. He stopped and held up a hand. "Here, there's a break in the shield." "There's another one of those black buildings," Obi-Wan pointed out. The long, low building sat next to the wall on the city side. "I still don't know what they are, but I suggest we avoid them," Qui-Gon remarked. "We'll scale the wall near those trees." "We'll need the Force," Obi-Wan said, eyeing the high wall. "Yes, but a carbon rope would help too," Qui-Gon said, smiling. He put his pack down, then leaned over to root through it. "We'll need yours too, Padawan." Obi-Wan stepped closer to Qui-Gon, swinging his pack off his shoulder to the ground. His boot suddenly hit something with a clang. He looked down and saw he had displaced some dirt on top of a metal plate. "Look, Master," he said. "I wonder what this—" He didn't get a chance to finish. Energy bars suddenly rose from the ground, trapping them. Before they could move, the metal plate slid open, and they fell into an abyss below. Chapter 2. Obi-Wan was falling through some sort of metal tube. He tried to slow his descent with his heels, but they only clattered against the rough metal surface. His speed increased, and he tumbled forward, hitting his head on the edge of the tube and then spilling out onto a dirt floor. He lay for a moment, stunned. Qui-Gon picked himself up immediately, his lightsaber in hand. He stood over Obi-Wan in case he needed protection. "I'm all right," Obi-Wan said, his head clearing. He struggled to his feet, grabbing his lightsaber as he did so. "Where are we?" "In some sort of holding cell," Qui-Gon answered. Smooth durasteel walls surrounded them. There was no crack or opening that Obi-Wan could see. "We're trapped," he said. His voice bounced off the walls, sounding hollow. "No, Padawan," Qui-Gon said quietly. "There is more than one entrance to this cell." "How do you know?" "Because we are not the first to fall into it." Qui-Gon explored the tiny space, using his lightsaber for illumination. "The tube we fell down is battered, and the dirt is disturbed by other footprints. The others have been taken out somehow, and it would be impossible to do so from the way we came in. This trap is engineered to capture, not kill. There must be another door. Besides," he added, "there are no bones or remains. That means that whoever set the trap removes who they capture." "Eventually," Obi-Wan muttered. His stomach was empty, and he wished he'd had time to eat before he'd left the starfighter. "I lost my survival pack," he told Qui-Gon. "It's on the surface." "Mine is as well. We'll have to use our lightsabers," Qui-Gon replied. Obi-Wan had food in mind more than illumination, but he followed Qui-Gon's example and activated his lightsaber. He held it close to the walls surrounding him, examining them. As he worked, he felt the Force begin to move between them, filling the space. He clearly saw every irregularity in the seemingly smooth walls. He searched for a hidden seam, sure now that they would find one. All he had to do was trust the Force. As a student at the temple, he had been mystified by the Force. He knew he was Force-sensitive. It was why he had been chosen to study at the temple as a child. But throughout his training, he often found the Force elusive and unreliable. He was able to tap into it, but not every time he wanted to. When he did, he could not control it. With Qui-Gon, he had learned that it was not his job to control it, but to join it. Now he could rely on it to guide him, give him strength and vision. He was beginning to understand how deeply it pulsed, how steady a presence it was. As a Jedi, he had constant access to it. It was the greatest gift he could imagine being given. "Here," Qui-Gon said quietly. At first, Obi-Wan could not see anything, but then he noticed a tiny hairline crack in the even surface of the wall. Qui-Gon moved his hand over the seam. "Of course, the locking device is on the other side," he mused. "I'm assuming it's blast-proof, but I'm also assuming that no Jedi has ever been trapped here before." Together, Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon moved the beams of their lightsabers down the outline of the door. The sabers cut through the metal, which curled back like a tender green leaf. A small opening was exposed. Qui-Gon squeezed through, and Obi-Wan followed. He found himself in a short, narrow tunnel, which led to what he sensed was a huge space. It was pitch dark, a darkness so black it held no shadows. Even the glow of his lightsaber seemed swallowed up by the absolute darkness. They stopped, listening carefully, but not a sound moved through the space. Obi-Wan could not even hear his breathing, or Qui-Gon's. Jedi are trained to slow their breath so they make no sound, even when they are under pressure or stress. "I think we are alone," Qui-Gon said quietly. His voice echoed, confirming Obi-Wan's belief that they were in a wide, open space. They moved forward cautiously, lightsabers held in defensive position. Obi-Wan felt a trickle of perspiration snake down the back of his neck. Something was wrong here. He could feel it. "The Force is dark," Qui-Gon murmured, angry. "Yet I don't feel a living Force here." Obi-Wan nodded. He could not have put his finger on what he felt, but Qui-Gon had been able to. Some deep-rooted evil was here, yet he did not feel a living pulse around him. Obi-Wan's foot hit a ledge that he hadn't been able to see. He reached out to steady himself against a stone column. In that split second of lost concentration, a flicker of movement came from his right. He whirled, lightsaber held high. A warrior appeared, moving quickly toward him from the deep shadows. His blaster aimed straight at Obi-Wan's heart. Chapter 3. Obi-Wan sprang, his lightsaber slashing forward. The beam did not meet flesh or bone, but passed harmlessly through the figure. Surprised, Obi-Wan whirled to the left to launch another attack, but Qui-Gon stopped him. "You cannot fight this enemy, Padawan," Qui-Gon said. Obi-Wan looked closer. The warrior, he realized, was a hologram. Suddenly, a voice boomed out. "I am Quintama, captain of the Melita Liberation Force." The hologram moved his blaster to his side. "Tomorrow will commence the 21st Battle of Zihava. It will doom our Dawn enemies to destruction once and for all, and we shall achieve glorious victory. We shall recapture the city that we founded 1,000 years ago. All Melita will live in peace." 21st Battle of Zihava? Obi-Wan whispered to Qui-Gon. "The city has changed hands many times over the years," Qui-Gon remarked. "Look at his blaster. It's an old model. I'd say 50 years or more." "I look forward to glorious total victory," the ghostly figure continued. "And yet, there's a chance that in achieving my victory, I will die. I accept my death willingly, as does my wife Pinani, who fights by my side. But for my children—" The booming voice faltered for only a moment. "My children, Rinai and Wunana. I leave the memory of the ancestors I have shared with them, the stories of our long persecution by the Dawn. I saw my father killed, and I will avenge his death. I saw my village starved, and I will avenge my neighbors. Remember me, my children, and remember what I have suffered at the hands of the Dawn. If I die, pick up my weapon and avenge me as I have avenged my family." Abruptly, the hologram disappeared. "I guess he didn't make it," Obi-Wan said. He crouched down to a stone marker. "He died in that battle." Qui-Gon moved past the marker and came to the next. A large golden ball was mounted on a column next to it. He placed his hand on it. Immediately, another hologram rose from its marker like a ghost. "I must have triggered the first one when I stumbled," Obi-Wan said. The second hologram was a woman. Her tunic was torn and stained, her hair clipped short. She carried a force pike and had one blaster strapped to a hip, another to a thigh. "I am Pinani, widow of Quintama, daughter of the great heroes Bicha and Taraka. Tonight we march on the town of Bin to avenge the Battle of Zihava. Our supplies have been depleted, our weapons are low. Most of us died in the glorious battle to retake our beloved city of Zihava from the ruthless Dawn. There is no chance that our battle will succeed, yet we will fight for justice and vengeance against the enemy who persecutes us. My husband died before my eyes. My father and mother died when the Dawn marched into our village and rounded them up and killed them. And so I say to you, my children, Rinai and Munana, do not forget us. Fight on. Avenge this great, terrible wrong. I will die bravely. I die for you." The hologram blinked out. Obi-Wan crossed to the next marker. "Rinai and Wunana both died only 3 years later in the 22nd Battle of Zihava," he said. "They were barely older than me." He turned and met Qui-Gon's eyes. "What kind of place is this?" he asked. "A mausoleum," Qui-Gon said. "A place for the dead to rest. But here on Melita Dawn, the memories stay alive. Look." Qui-Gon pointed to the offerings that they now saw heaped on pedestals in front of the columns. The flowers were fresh, the trays of seeds and cups of water replenished. They walked down the aisles, past row after row of graves, activating hologram after hologram. The vast echoing space filled with the voices of the dead. They saw generations tell their stories of blood and vengeance. They heard tales of whole villages starved and then slaughtered, children torn from their mothers' arms, mass executions, forced marches that ended in suffering and more death. "The Dawn sound like a bloodthirsty people," Obi-Wan remarked. The accounts of suffering and agony had moved through him with growing pain from a deep wound. "We're in a Melita mausoleum," Qui-Gon replied. "I wonder what the Dawn have to say." "There are so many dead," Obi-Wan observed, "but there's no clear reason why they fight. Battle follows battle, each one conducted to avenge the one before. What is the real dispute?" "Perhaps they have forgotten it," Obi-Wan said. "The hatred is bred in their bones. Now they fight over meters of territory, or to avenge a wrong that happened 100 years before." Obi-Wan shivered. The damp, cold air had invaded his body. He felt cut away from the rest of the galaxy. His world had funneled down into this black, shadowy space full of blood, revenge, and death. Our mission here hasn't even begun, and already I've seen enough suffering to last a lifetime. Qui-Gon's gaze was sad. There are some worlds that manage to hold on to peace for centuries, Padawan, but I'm afraid that many have seen terrible wars that scar the memories of each generation. It has always been. Well, I've seen enough for now, Obi-Wan said. Let's find the way out. They walked quickly now, hurrying past the markers, searching for an exit. At last they saw a square brightness ahead. It was a door fashioned from a translucent material that emitted a white glow. Qui-Gon pressed the exit indicator light, and they spilled out into the weak sunshine with relief. They remained in the shadow of the doorway, scanning the immediate area before moving on. The mausoleum was perched on a ridge. Ahead of them rose a steep hill that ended in an overhanging cliff. A path wound through gardens to their left, a wall to their right. I guess we have to go that way, Obi-Wan said, pointing to the path. I suppose, Qui-Gon said. Still, he hesitated, his keen gaze searching the steep hillside in front of them. Suddenly, the dirt exploded in front of Obi-Wan's feet. "Snipers!" Qui-Gon yelled. "Take cover!" Chapter 4. The blaster fire came from the top of the overhanging cliff. Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon leaped to the top of the wall on their right. Chips of stone splintered and flew as blaster fire ripped into the wall. Qui-Gon took a split second to balance and survey what lay below. Then he leaped down, Obi-Wan directly behind him. They landed in a small area with humming banks of machinery. Walls surrounded them on 3 sides, the mausoleum building on the other. They would be trapped here under fire, but at least the blaster fire could not reach them. Qui-Gon wondered fleetingly if the snipers would get bored and go away. Unfortunately, in his long experience, snipers never got bored and went away. Qui-Gon examined the machinery. These must be the heating and cooling units for the building, he observed as blaster fire continued to rip over their heads. At least we're out of the line of fire, Obi-Wan said. I'm afraid we have a bigger problem, Qui-Gon said. He bent down to examine a metal tank. This is full of proton fuel. If the blaster fire hits it, we'll be blown from here back to the starship. He exchanged a concerned glance with Obi-Wan. They would have to expose themselves to the snipers. They could not remain here and continue to draw fire. Let's see what's on the other side of that wall, Qui-Gon said, indicating the wall opposite to the one they had leaped over. Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon summoned the Force. When Qui-Gon felt it grow and pulse around them, he jumped, along with Obi-Wan. As they leaped into midair, they took a quick survey of what lay on the other side, blaster fire suddenly intensifying around them. Qui-Gon deflected with his lightsaber. They fell back to the ground. It's a big drop down to that ravine, Obi-Wan reported to Qui-Gon. Do you think we can make it? The ground looks soft, Qui-Gon said. That could help our landing, but if it's swampy, we could be in trouble. We don't want to be swallowed by a bog. Remember that the terrain of Melita Dawn can be treacherous. At least we'll surprise the snipers, Obi-Wan pointed out. They won't expect us to risk it. Qui-Gon nodded. We can work our way around the cliff and scale it from the other side to surprise them further. The brush will cover us. They won't know which way we went, and probably won't expect us to attack. The only alternative, Master, is to go back over the wall. Once we made it to that path, we'd have to shelter in the gardens. Qui-Gon paused, thinking of their next move. While he considered the odds, he thought about the way he and Obi-Wan had come to function together as a unit. Though at times their relations could be bumpy, under pressure their rhythm matched, their thoughts clicked. He admired his Padawan's ability to operate on all levels. Even under great pressure, Obi-Wan could strategize, calculate odds and opportunities, and make a joke. If we try for the gardens, we lose the element of surprise, Qui-Gon said finally. Remember this, Padawan. When one is outnumbered, surprise is your best ally. Let's try the ravine. Blaster fire pinged against metal, and Qui-Gon flicked an apprehensive gaze at the proton gas tank. I think it's time we left. Don't forget there's a line of shrubs at the immediate bottom of the slope on the other side. Make your jump as wide as you can. Qui-Gon reached out for the Force. It was always there, ready for him to tap into. It was his companion as much as Obi-Wan was. He pictured the leap he would have to make. Nothing was impossible when the Force was near. His body would do what it needed to do. They backed up as far as they could for a running start. Then they ran forward 3 quick steps and took the leap. They cleared the wall easily. The force and the momentum sent them sailing through the air, over the steep slope into the ravine. Qui-Gon felt the swampy ground move under his feet as he landed, but it did not suck him down. Obi-Wan landed softly a short distance behind him. "Hurry, Padawan," Qui-Gon urged. Mud sucked at their boots, hampering their progress as they struggled to make their way around the cliff face. They could hear the blaster fire, and then the thump of a proton grenade exploding. Qui-Gon turned. The grenade had fallen just short of the walled enclosure, but if one scored a direct hit on the proton fuel tank, it could help them. An explosion would be good cover for the successful assault. At last they made it to the opposite side of the cliff. Here the rocky ground sloped sharply upward. It would be a steep climb, but at least the ground was firm. Obi-Wan moved quickly and tirelessly beside him, his physical strength backed by a strong will. Obi-Wan would learn grace as he grew older, Qui-Gon knew. They slowed their ascent as they grew closer to the top of the hill. Surprise was not only helpful, but necessary. They had no idea how many snipers they would find. When they were close to the top, Qui-Gon gave the signal and they dropped to their knees. They lay flat, then squirmed up the remaining distance on their stomachs. Qui-Gon guided them to the shelter of a cluster of boulders at the hill's edge. 4 snipers were lined up on the cliff face, lying flat with their blasters pointed toward a mausoleum. Not bad odds for Jedi, Qui-Gon thought. Silently, he drew his lightsaber. Obi-Wan did the same. At Qui-Gon's nod, the 2 of them leaped up, activating their lightsabers at the same time. They made barely a whisper of sound as they moved. Qui-Gon headed for the largest, strongest-looking sniper. Obi-Wan leaped toward the sniper about to fire a blaster rifle. With a single blow of Obi-Wan's lightsaber, the blaster rifle cracked in 2. Qui-Gon struck down at the largest sniper's weapon, and the blaster flew from his hand. The sniper rolled away to avoid the next blow, kicking out at Qui-Gon as he did so. The blow connected, sending fire through Qui-Gon's ribcage and surprising him. He was also surprised to note the sniper had only 1 arm. A 3rd sniper moved toward Qui-Gon with a vibro shiv. Qui-Gon turned quickly to his left to avoid the blade, slashing down with his lightsaber to disarm the sniper. Obi-Wan launched himself at the 4th sniper and kicked his blaster rifle off the cliff. Qui-Gon somersaulted backward as the 1-armed sniper fired from a blaster he'd retrieved from an ankle holster. The blaster fire just missed him. The 2nd sniper, who had lost his vibro shiv, threw a proton grenade at Qui-Gon. The Jedi Knight leaped out of the way and it sailed over the cliff. Qui-Gon whirled to disarm his 1-armed opponent, but suddenly he was shaken by an enormous explosion. The grenade had hit the proton gas tank. Qui-Gon felt air move against his skin like a wall of fire. His Jedi reflexes helped him stand his ground. Obi-Wan was also prepared, but the 4th sniper lost his balance with a cry, tumbling over the edge of the cliff. He grabbed a root and hoisted himself uneasily back to safety. Obi-Wan hovered over him, lightsaber ready, prepared to defend himself if necessary. Qui-Gon's 1-armed adversary kept his blaster steady. He was a little older than Qui-Gon. Underneath his plastoid armor, his body was lean and strong. Synth flesh covered one cheek. Qui-Gon guessed it had been recently applied, since it did not have a chance to knit into living flesh. The 1-armed man's eyes flicked to Qui-Gon's weapon, and he laughed. "Is that the famous lightsaber I've heard so much about?" Surprised to find himself having a conversation with a man desperately trying to kill him, Qui-Gon nodded. The man grinned. "Jedi, we thought you were done." Qui-Gon did not lower his lightsaber. The man tossed his blaster aside. "Relax, Jedi. By the strength of our mothers and the valor of our fathers, this is no trick. I am your contact, Wahudi. So you're here after all." Chapter 5. "We were told to meet you on the outskirts of Zihava," Qui-Gon remarked as he deactivated his lightsaber. "I apologize for failing to meet you," Wahudi said, striding forward to greet them. "The message I received from the temple is garbled. The despicable and evil Dawn often jam communications. I sent back a message I would meet with Jedi representatives, hoping I would get further instructions. Right now, we are in the sector that Zidane plundered from us in the 22nd battle. Until we have our vengeance, they control the outskirts of the city. I've been sneaking over for 3 days now, hoping I would find you somehow. He extended his palm outward in the local greeting. You must be Qui-Gon Jinn. This is my apprentice, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Qui-Gon said. Obi-Wan bowed to Wee-Huddy. He was grateful they had found their contact. They had barely been on Melita Dawn for an hour, and it was already apparent what a treacherous place it was. Wee-Huddy introduced his comrades as Moidi, Kijas, and Hirut. Hirut clutched his sore wrist and glowered at Obi-Wan, who tried to look friendly. It appears we are lucky to have found you, Qui-Gon said. If the Dawn control the perimeter, I'm surprised you would venture so far. Wee-Huddy's friendly face grew stony. In the valiant spirit of our honored ancestors, we must protect our Hall of Evidence. Hall of Evidence? Obi-Wan asked. Wee-Huddy gestured at the black monolith below where Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan had wandered. It is where we store the honored memories of our glorious dead. They are all warriors and heroes. If the low-life Dawn had their way, they would destroy our most sacred places. We need to show them they cannot enter. So the Melita and the Dawn are still at war, Qui-Gon said. No, we have a ceasefire at the moment, Wee-Huddy said. He drew a circle in the dirt with the toe of his boot, then a larger circle around it. The bloodthirsty Dawn drove the Melita from their homes and contained them here in the inner hub. He pointed to the inner circle. The barbarians surround us on the outer circle, but victory will come one day. We shall retake Zihava. Block by block we will move outward. Qui-Gon eyed the blaster on the ground. You have a ceasefire, but I see you still shoot. The day I put down my weapon is the day that the Melita are free, Wee-Huddy said quietly. What about Jedi Knight Tal? Qui-Gon asked. Do you have news? Wee-Huddy nodded. I've spoken to the Melita leaders. They've come to see that holding a Jedi will not help our cause. A bit more negotiation might be called for, but I have every certainty she will be released to your care. That is good news, Qui-Gon said. Wee-Huddy nodded. Now we must go. It isn't safe here. Like our martyred ancestors, we are in danger every moment. He turned to Mohidi, Kijas, and Hirut. Gather the weapons. See if you can find the blaster rifle below. I'll see you back in the hub. His 3 companions hurried off, gathering up the vibro-shiv and damaged blaster before they left. Wee-Huddy picked up his blaster and returned it to its holster. We are very low on weapons, he explained to the Jedi. Even damaged ones must be salvaged for the day of our vengeance. Are you low on med supplies as well? Qui-Gon asked. Wee-Huddy nodded and pointed to his absent arm. No plastoid limbs available, I'm afraid. Some were lucky to get them, but many were not. We ran through everything we had after the last battle of Zihava, and the government has no money to order more. But I do all right. The sacrifice of my people means more than my pain. Qui-Gon touched the spot where Wee-Huddy had hit him and winced. You do just fine, he told his former attacker. Wee-Huddy led them back down the rocky slope and turned down a path that ran behind houses at the edge of a park. The park was filled with damaged and rusting starfighters and floaters. The Dawn don't seem to have funds either, Qui-Gon noted. The last war bankrupted both sides, Wee-Huddy said cheerfully. At least we're even. He handed the Jedi 2 yellow discs. In case we're stopped. Those are forged Dawn identity cards. But let's hope we're not stopped. Wee-Huddy led them down twisting alleyways and through the rear gardens of grand houses, down tiny streets and over rooftops. If they saw people ahead, they ducked into the shadows of buildings, or simply turned in the opposite direction. A fine rain began to fall, keeping most people off the streets. You know the city well, Qui-Gon observed. Wee-Huddy's mouth twisted. I lived in this area as a young man. Now I'm forbidden to come here. At last they reached a desolate area. The buildings were bombed out, the windows shattered. This used to be a Melita neighborhood, Wee-Huddy explained. Now the Dawn control it, but no one will live here. Too close to Melita territory. They hurried down the street. Ahead was a tall fence with 2 deflection towers flanking it. Cannons were trained at the street ahead. Don't worry, Wee-Huddy said. The guards know me. They walked past the checkpoint with Wee-Huddy giving a casual wave to the guards. They saluted him respectfully. Obi-Wan noted that they were older, possibly in their 60s. They seemed old to be guards. Once in Melita territory, Obi-Wan tried to relax, but his nerves were still jumping. He felt just as apprehensive as he had in Dawn territory. Maybe it was the severe disturbances he could feel in the Force. Qui-Gon strode by his side, his face impassive, but Obi-Wan knew his master was alert and watchful. Barricades and checkpoints were set up at almost every block. He could see the evidence of battles fought here. Blaster and grenade blasts pockmarked the buildings, and many were in ruins. Everyone he saw on the streets carried weapons in plain view. It was like the planets he'd heard about in the far reaches of the galaxy, where no laws were followed. We noticed other halls of evidence as we flew over Melita Dawn, Qui-Gon remarked to Wee-Huddy. We call our world Melita. Wee-Huddy corrected Qui-Gon in a friendly way. We do not link our great tradition to that of the filthy Dawn. Yes, even the Dawn have halls of evidence. Evidence of their lies, we say. We Melita visit our ancestors every week to hear their stories. We bring our children so we keep alive the history of injustices the Melita have suffered at the hands of the Dawn. Nobody forgets. Nobody will ever forget. Obi-Wan felt a chill at Wee-Huddy's grim words. Even if the Dawn were as bad as he said, how could they continue to wage battle after battle when they were destroying their world piece by piece? He could see that Zihava had once been a beautiful city. Now it was a ruin. By building these enormous halls of evidence, were they keeping history alive or destroying their civilization? And there was something else that was wrong here, Obi-Wan thought. Something that hovered at the back of his mind. Something he couldn't quite place. Obi-Wan's gaze moved absently down the street to a group of Melitas sitting outside at a cafe. The window of the restaurant had been blown out, and a fire had destroyed the interior, but the owner had set out tables and chairs on the walkway outside. A few tubs of blooming plants with bright red flowers struggled to add a cheerful note next to the bomb-blasted building. Suddenly, Obi-Wan realized what was wrong. He hadn't seen anyone on the streets older than 20 or younger than 50 or so. Mostly the streets were crowded with elders and young people like himself. He had seen no men or women of Qui-Gon's age except for Wee-Huddy. Even the other snipers had been elders, he realized. Were the midlife people all working or gathered somewhere for a meeting? Wee-Huddy, where are all the middle-aged people? Obi-Wan asked curiously. They're dead, Wee-Huddy said flatly. Even Qui-Gon looked startled. The wars have wiped out the middle generation. The Dawn have wiped out the middle generation, Wee-Huddy corrected grimly. Obi-Wan had noticed the same lack of the middle generation in the Dawn sector, but he didn't mention it to Wee-Huddy. Obviously, the hatred of the Dawn ran so deep in Wee-Huddy that he could see no other sides of the story. As they passed the blown-out cafe, Obi-Wan noticed graffiti in a partially destroyed wall. Scrawled in blazing red paint were the words, "The young will rise. We are everyone." They turned a corner and walked through a neighborhood that had once prospered. As they made their way through the barricades onto once pleasant squares, Obi-Wan noticed more graffiti. It all repeated what he'd seen on the cafe wall. "Who are the young?" he asked Wee-Huddy, pointing to the graffiti. "Is it some organized group?" Wee-Huddy frowned. "Just kids fooling around. It isn't enough that we have to live in Dawn-destroyed homes and gardens. Our own children have to make our surroundings worse by defacing them. Ah, here we are." He stopped in front of a once luxurious mansion. A solid durasteel wall had been erected around it. It was topped with coils of electro-wire. The windows were barred, and Obi-Wan was sure they would release an electro-charge if touched. The house was now a fortress. Wee-Huddy stopped in front of the gate and pressed his eye against the iris reader. The gate clicked open, and he gestured for them to go inside. They stepped into a walled courtyard. In front of the house was a rack filled with weapons. "I'm afraid you must leave your lightsabers here," Wee-Huddy said apologetically. He unstrapped his own weapons from their holsters. "This is Melita headquarters. It's a weapon-free zone." Qui-Gon hesitated a fraction. Obi-Wan waited to see what he would do. A Jedi is never separated from his or her lightsaber. "I'm sorry, but if you break this rule, the negotiations will go badly for you," Wee-Huddy said in a conciliatory tone. "They need proof of your trust since you asked for theirs, but it is your decision." Slowly, Qui-Gon withdrew his lightsaber. He nodded at Obi-Wan to do the same. He slipped it into the rack, then took Obi-Wan's and slipped it next to his. Wee-Huddy smiled. "I'm sure this will go smoothly. This way." Qui-Gon gestured for Obi-Wan to step in first as he gathered the folds of his cloak more closely around him. Wee-Huddy followed directly behind them. The hallway was dark, the stone floor pitted with holes. Huddy led the way to a room on the left. Dark material was hung over the windows, shutting out any light. A lamp in one corner emitted a tiny glow that failed to chase away the shadows. Obi-Wan made out a group of men and women sitting at a long table against the wall. They appeared to be waiting for them. The Melita Council, Huddy explained to them in a whisper. They rule the Melita people. He closed the heavy door behind them with a clang. Obi-Wan heard a lock spring. He glanced at Qui-Gon, trying to read if his master felt the same jolt of apprehension. "I've returned, comrades," Huddy announced. He spread his arms to indicate Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon. "And I have brought 2 more Jedi hostages for our grand cause." Chapter 6. Huddy had barely finished speaking when Qui-Gon moved. His lightsaber was activated in his hand while the smile still beamed on Huddy's face. Qui-Gon whirled, striking Huddy on the shoulder. At the same time he tossed Obi-Wan's lightsaber to him, hoping the boy was prepared to catch it. Qui-Gon had been ready for Huddy's betrayal. He did not need the Force to tell him that Huddy had led them into a trap. His instincts had told him so before they'd even reached the gates of the inner hub. When Huddy had asked them to leave their weapons, Qui-Gon had only feigned his hesitation. He had foreseen the request and was already planning to get around it. It had been easy to unfurl his cloak to cover his recapture of the lightsabers. Even clever men can see only what they want to see. Huddy had already been congratulating himself on his own ingenuity in luring the Jedi into his trap. Huddy fell with a cry of rage and pain. Obi-Wan activated his lightsaber. "The door," Qui-Gon said to him, and prepared to defend himself against the group seated at the table. Several had half risen, but the remaining Melita were still too shocked to react. He heard Obi-Wan strike a blow to the lock. 2 warriors, a man and a woman, had been quicker to react than the others. They started toward Qui-Gon, blasters in hand. Suddenly, a light blazed on. Obi-Wan must have activated the lighting while he struggled with the door. It was better not to fight in the dark, though every Jedi is trained to be able to do so. Qui-Gon suppressed a start of surprise when the Melita soldiers were fully revealed. All of them had already been severely wounded. He saw evidence of synth flesh covering faces and exposed skin, as well as plastoid limbs. 2 of the group wore breath masks. The Melita and the Don were truly destroying each other piece by piece. This was only a fleeting thought, gone as quickly as it had come. Qui-Gon knew he must concentrate on the threat. He deflected the blaster fire as he ran to Obi-Wan, who had easily melted the lock. The door stood open. Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon raced from the room into the corridor. Pounding footsteps overhead made them pause. A red light blinked insistently on the wall. Bars suddenly slammed down over the front door. "Someone triggered a silent alarm," Qui-Gon said. "We'll never get out that door," Obi-Wan warned. They turned toward the hallway, racing to find a back exit. They knew they had little time before the rest of the Melita soldiers found them. As they passed various points in the hallway, an electronic beep sounded. "Those are location sensors," Qui-Gon said. "They're tracking us. They know exactly where we are." At the end of the hallway they came to a heavily fortified door. Qui-Gon turned to the left and opened the first door he saw. They would have to get out a window if they could. The room was high-ceilinged and full of stored equipment. Circuits, nav computers, sensor parts, dismantled droids. Qui-Gon crossed to the window. Electro bars ran in a grid over the pane. The security device would keep out life forms and resist some forms of weaponry, but it was no match for a Jedi lightsaber. Qui-Gon cut through the bars with one swipe, leaving a gap big enough for them to leap through. Then he did the same with the window pane. "Come, Padawan," he urged Obi-Wan. The boy leaped easily through the gap. Qui-Gon followed. They found themselves in a walled and fortified courtyard. The wall would easily be scaled, Qui-Gon calculated. Too easily. "Come on, Qui-Gon," Obi-Wan said impatiently. "Wait." Qui-Gon walked closer to the wall. He crouched down and studied it. "It's mined," he told Obi-Wan. "Thermal detonators. If we climb it or even leap over it, the infrared sensors will blow us sky high." "So we're trapped?" "I'm afraid so," Qui-Gon answered, his mind sifting through the possibilities. They would have to re-enter the Melita fortress and fight their way out. They didn't have much time. The soldiers would figure out where they were in seconds. Qui-Gon whirled, his lightsaber raised, as he heard a metallic scraping sound. But no Melita warrior was in sight. He tracked the sound to the floor. A small sewer grate was being pushed back. A small, dirty hand shot out of the opening and beckoned. Obi-Wan looked at Qui-Gon, puzzled. "What should we do?" he whispered. An ironic voice floated up from the grate. "Go ahead, talk droids. Have a debate. I'll wait. We have plenty of time." Qui-Gon heard shouting and running in the fortress. Any moment now, soldiers would appear at the window. "Let's go," he told Obi-Wan. He waited while his Padawan slithered into the opening. Qui-Gon followed blindly, his feet searching and finding the rung of a ladder leading downward. Hoping he hadn't made a mistake, Qui-Gon climbed down. Chapter 7. Obi-Wan felt his way down the rickety metal ladder. He stepped off the last rung into ankle-deep water. Qui-Gon followed, moving with his usual grace, surprising for such a large man. It was impossible to tell if the rescuer was a boy or a girl. The figure wore a hooded tunic and pressed a dirty finger against its lips. Then he or she raised a finger and pointed above. The meaning was clear. If they weren't absolutely quiet, the guards above would hear. The footsteps above were loud, the voices angry and insistent. The Jedi's rescuer turned and walked very slowly through the water, raising one foot and slipping it carefully back into the water so that no splash was heard. Obi-Wan followed the example. Softly, quietly, they moved farther down the tunnel. The walls were shored up with splintered beams. Obi-Wan eyed them uneasily. The tunnel did not seem very secure to him. Still, it was an improvement over fighting his way out of a heavily armed fortress. As soon as they had put some distance between themselves and the entrance, they picked up their pace. They walked through what felt like miles of tunnel, slogging through water and muck. Occasionally, the water was up to their knees. Their rescuer led them through old sewer tunnels, and the smell was terrible. Obi-Wan tried not to gag. Their rescuer seemed not to notice it, but kept up the same dogged, determined pace. At last they came to a large vaulted space illuminated by several glow rods mounted on the walls. The ground was dry here, the air noticeably fresher. The room was dotted with rectangular stone boxes overgrown with moss. More lined the walls. "Tombs," Qui-Gon murmured. "It's an old resting ground." One of the tombs, scraped clean of moss, gave off a pale white gleam in the darkness. Stools were drawn up around it. A group of young boys and girls, some the same age as Obi-Wan, some younger, sat eating from bowls at the makeshift table. A tall boy with close-cropped dark hair noticed their entrance. He stood. "I found them," their rescuer announced. The boy nodded. "Welcome, Jedi," he said solemnly. "We are the young." Around them, the walls seemed to move. Shapes took form and became boys and girls, appearing out of the shadows and from behind the tombs to gather around Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon. Startled, Obi-Wan gazed around at their faces. Most of them were thin and dressed in rags. All wore makeshift weapons tied onto belts or shoulder holsters. They gazed at him curiously, without any attempt to be polite. The tall boy moved forward. He wore a battered chestplate of plastoid armor. "I am Neild. I lead the young. This is Serasi." Their rescuer threw back the hood, and Obi-Wan saw that she was a girl about his age. Her copper hair was cut short and ragged. She had a small face with a pointed chin. Her pale green eyes were like crystals, glittering even in the dark vault. "Thank you for rescuing us," Qui-Gon said. "Now, can you tell us why you did?" "You would have been a pawn in the game of the war," Neild said with a shrug. "We prefer that the game be over." "I saw graffiti on walls about the young," Obi-Wan said. "Are you Melita or Dawn?" Serasi shook her head. "We are everyone," she said, lifting her chin proudly. "And you want the war to stop?" Qui-Gon asked. "There is a ceasefire," Obi-Wan pointed out. Neild waved his hand. "The war will start again. Tomorrow, next week. It always does. Even the oldest among the elders don't remember what the original grievance was. They don't remember why the war began. They only remember the battles. They keep archives and go once a week to remind each other of the blood that has been spilled. They used to make us go, too. The halls of evidence, Obi-Wan said, nodding. Yes, they pour money into those halls while the cities decay around us, Neild said contemptuously, while the children starve and the ill die for lack of med supplies. Both Melita and Don use up huge tracts of land while there is no land left to farm, no land left that has not been scarred by war, taken up by the preparation for more war. And yet they go on fighting, Sarasi put in. The hatred never stops. And who do our glorious leaders defend? Neild asked. Only the dead. He gestured at the tombs. The dead are everywhere on Melita Dawn. We have no spaces left to put them. This is an old burial ground, and there are many others above us. The young are for the living. It is up to us to take back the planet. The middle generation is gone. Our parents are dead. Any who have left have joined with the elders to keep on fighting. Right now, the tactics are sniping and sabotage, since most of the weaponry and ammunition were depleted in the last great battle. There are hardly any starfighters left, Sarasi told them. Both the Melita and the Dawn are pouring whatever money they have into factories to make more weapons. They are forcing children to work in them. They are forcing anyone over 14 to join the army. That's why we came underground. It was either this or die. Obi-Wan gazed around the vault at the faces of the boys and girls around him. From what he had seen in his short time on the planet, he knew that Neild and Sarasi were right. The elders were destroying the planet. The time-honored moral law of improving a world for future generations did not hold here. Even children were sacrificed to hatred. Obi-Wan admired them for fighting back. That's why we saved you from Wihati, Neild said. The War Council was planning to use the two of you as hostages to force the Jedi Council to back a Melita government. They hoped to force you to speak on their behalf in the Senate on Coruscant. Then he does not know the Jedi, Qui-Gon remarked. A slender boy spoke up. He doesn't know anything, he said in a joking tone. He's a Melita. Neild sprang forward like a shot from a blaster rifle. He wrapped two hands around the boy's neck and picked him up off the floor. The boy's feet flailed out as Neild squeezed his throat. The boy's eyes widened in a desperate plea. He let out an anguished croaking noise, trying to get air into his lungs. Neild squeezed harder. Qui-Gon took a step forward, but at that moment Neild loosened his grip. The boy fell to the floor, gasping. No talk like that here, Neild said. Ever. We are everyone. Towan, you'll sleep for 3 days and drain 2 for that. The boy nodded, his hands on his throat protectively, trying to gasp in air. No one looked at him as he slinked to the back of the group and disappeared into the shadows. We'll help you locate Tal, Neild said calmly, returning to the conversation as though nothing had happened. But you must help us, too. Obi-Wan had to stop himself from crying out, Of course we will help you. It was up to his master to do that. Never in any mission had he met a cause that seemed so just. They had been sent here to rescue Tal, but surely if they could continue her mission as guardian of peace, they should do so. It was in the galaxy's best interest to stabilize the planet. Neild was offering them a chance to do this as well as their primary mission. He waited for Qui-Gon to speak. All the faces in the vault turned expectantly to the tall, rugged Jedi Knight. We have spoken to the Melita, Qui-Gon said cautiously. We have spoken to you, but we have not received a complete picture of what goes on here. I cannot promise you help until I've seen something of the dawn. It took a moment for Qui-Gon's words to sink in. Then Neild's face flushed with anger. You want to see something of the dawn? He asked challengingly. I am a dawn. Come with me. I'll show you that the dawn are no better than the Melita, and no worse. Chapter 8. Sarasi led the way through the tunnels again, away from the direction they had come in, straight into Dawn territory. Sarasi knows every step of these tunnels, Neild explained as they followed behind her. His earlier anger had passed as quickly as it had come. She was the first to come down here to live. Why did she leave her life above ground? Qui-Gon asked. She saw the way things are, as I did, Neild answered. There is no life for us up there. Down here we have muck and filth, but we have hope. His teeth gleamed in the darkness as he smiled. "It may seem strange to you, but we're happier here." "It's not strange at all," Obi-Wan said. "Was it the young who shored up the tunnels?" Qui-Gon asked. "The work seems recent." Neil nodded before squeezing through a small opening, then waited for them to enter the new tunnel. "We did it, bit by bit, piece by piece. The tunnels were built during the 18th Battle of Zihava. The Dawn expanded the water and sewage tunnels and broke through into the underground burial vaults from the 10th War, working secretly at night to enter the Melita sector. That's when the city was divided between North and South. They won that battle. And then the 19th Battle of Zihava was fought barely 6 months later," Sarasi said, overhearing them. "The battles never stop. They never will unless we act." Sarasi paused. Light filtered down from a crack in the stone overhead. "Here." Qui-Gon eyed the curved ceiling of the tunnel. "Where?" Sarasi unclipped a ring of tension cord from her belt. She expertly tossed the cord above, and with a flicking motion of her wrist, wrapped it around a hook embedded in the mortar of the ceiling. Sarasi tested it, then glanced at Qui-Gon and flashed him a grin. "Don't worry, it will even hold you." She scrambled up the cord, hand over hand. When she'd almost reached the top, she swung out from the cord and hooked her fingers into the crack in the stone. She remained there, pressing her face against the crack. "All clear," she called down softly. She pushed off and swung hard, tilting her body back until she was almost upside down. Using her momentum, she kicked at the stone with her feet. It dislodged. With her next swing, she gave it a more gentle kick to move it out of the way. Qui-Gon heard a thud as the stone hit the ground overhead. On her next swing, Sarasi easily hooked her feet into the opening, then bent her body to swing herself out. The whole operation had taken maybe 30 seconds. Qui-Gon admired Sarasi's ability and strength. She popped her head back down. Nothing to it. One by one, the remaining 3 pulled themselves up the cord and then swung out of the opening. They were not quite as graceful and swift as Sarasi, but they made it. Qui-Gon found himself in a storeroom located in a service building in the back of an abandoned estate. It was a clever place to hide an entrance to the tunnels. Now Neil led the way, since he was familiar with the Dawn territory. "Don't worry," he told the Jedi. "I'm a Dawn, and many know me from here. You're safer in Dawn territory. At least the Dawn don't want to take you hostage." Now that Qui-Gon had more time, he was able to study the Dawn sector more closely. It didn't seem that much different than the inner hub. Abandoned, bombed-out buildings, barricades, food shortages in the shops, and everywhere people going about their daily lives with old and ragged weapons strapped to chests, hips, and ankles. He did not see many faces younger than 60, or older than 20. "This used to be a beautiful city," Neil remarked, sadness in his voice. "I've seen drawings and hologram recreations. It's been completely rebuilt 7 times. When I was very young, I remember trees and blossoms, and even a museum that had nothing to do with the dead." "There were no barricades for 5 years," Sarasi said softly. "Dons and Melitas mixed in both sectors. In some neighborhoods they even lived side by side. Then the 25th Battle of Zihava began." "What about your parents, Sarasi?" Obi-Wan asked. Sarasi's expression was hard for Qui-Gon to read. She seemed to struggle with the decision to share even a part of her story. "Their hatred destroyed them, like so many others. My mother died while conducting a sniper raid. My brother was sent to the country to work in a munitions factory. I've not heard a word from him since." "And your father?" Sarasi's face smoothed out, became bland. "He is dead," she said colorlessly. A story there, Qui-Gon thought. Each of the young, he realized, would have a similar one, full of sorrow and tragedy, of parents lost too soon, families fractured. That was the bond between them. Ahead, Qui-Gon saw a glimpse of blue water. They walked down a wide boulevard, leaping over large holes where proton torpedoes had fallen. "This is Lake Weir," Neild said. "I used to come swimming here when I was little. Now you'll see what the Dawn have done." As they drew closer, the patch of blue Qui-Gon had glimpsed between 2 buildings widened, and he could see that the lake was quite large. It would have been a beautiful expanse, except for the low, massive ebony stone building that floated slightly above the water by repulsor posts. Another hall of evidence, Neild said, disgusted. This was the last remaining body of water within 1,000 kilometers. Now no one can enjoy it but the dead. The wind ruffled Neild's hair as he gazed at the scene. His disgusted look softened to one of sadness, and Qui-Gon imagined that a memory of one of those swims had surfaced. He was suddenly struck by how young Neild looked. Underground, his manner had made him seem older than Obi-Wan, but they were about the same age. Qui-Gon gave a quick glance at Sarasi. Her slender, pretty face was pale, almost drawn, but he could still see the young child she'd once been. They were all so young, he thought in sorrow. Too young for the task they'd set themselves, to right centuries of wrong, to save a world cracked by tension and strife. "Come," Neild said, "let's see the happy dead speak." He strode forward, and they followed. He entered the stone door and walked quickly down the aisles, past monument after monument. He activated hologram after hologram, but did not stop to hear their tales. Their voices filled the huge chamber, echoing with their stories of revenge and hatred. Neild began to run, pressing globe after globe to activate the ghosts. Finally, he stopped in front of the last hologram he'd activated. It was a tall man with shoulder-length hair, wearing armor. "I am Mickey, son of Tyrande of Garth, from the North Country," the hologram said. "I was but a boy when the Melita invaded Garth and herded my people into camps. There, many died, including—" "And why did the Melita do that, you fool?" Neild mocked the figure, drowning out the list of the dead. "Perhaps because the Don soldiers in the North Country attacked the Melita settlements without warning, killing hundreds?" The warrior's tale went on. "And my mother died that day, without ever being reunited with my father. My father died in the great battle of the plains, avenging the great wrong of the Melita during the Battle of the North." "Which had taken place a century before," Neild scoffed. "And today I go to battle with my 3 sons. My youngest son is too young to join us. I fight today so he may never have to fight." "Fat chance," Neild jeered. "We seek justice, not vengeance. And that is why I know we shall triumph." The warrior raised his fist, then opened it in a gesture of peace. "Liars and fools!" Neild shouted. He turned abruptly away from the hologram. "Let's get out of here. I can't bear their stupid voices any more." They walked out into the open air. Great clouds were massing overhead, and the water looked almost as black as the great hall that floated above it, casting a long shadow. It was hard to tell where the building ended and the water began. "Do you see?" Neild demanded of Qui-Gon. "They will never stop. The young are this world's only hope. I know the Jedi are wise. You must see that our cause is just. Don't we deserve a chance?" Neild's golden eyes burned with fervor. Qui-Gon glanced at Obi-Wan. He saw that the boy had not only moved by Neild's words, but deeply stirred. That made him uneasy. Though a Jedi's heart could be touched, it was his duty to remain unbiased and calm. The situation here was complicated and volatile. They would need clear heads to navigate it. His instinct told him it was better not to take sides. But there was the question of Tal. Rescue was their primary mission. Neild had promised his help. Could he deliver on his promise? "I know where Tal is being held," Neild said, almost as though he'd read Qui-Gon's mind. "She is alive." "You can get us to this place?" Qui-Gon asked. "Sarasi can," Neild said. "It is heavily guarded, but I have a plan to take care of that. While you are rescuing Tal, the young will launch a surprise attack." "I am not sure how surprising an attack would be, given that the Melita know that the Jedi are on the loose," Qui-Gon said. "They will be expecting it." "But they will not be expecting a Dawn attack." "Are the Dawn planning to attack?" Obi-Wan asked. "No," Neild answered, "but that doesn't mean the Melita can't think they are. Our plan is to stage diversionary attacks in both the Melita and Dawn sectors. The Melita will think that the Dawn are attacking and send their forces out into the streets to defend themselves. The Dawn will do the same. I promise you confusion and chaos. Then you can go after Tal." "But you have no weapons," Obi-Wan said. "How do you expect to attack?" "We have a plan," Neild said mysteriously. "All we ask of you is to stay in the vault and not contact the Melita. Right now they are searching for you everywhere. It is better that their forces be busy with that chore, so we can do our work." So you see how easy we're making this for you? Sarasi asked. All we ask is that you do nothing. We'll take care of the diversion, Neil continued. You take care of Tall. I also know that her wounds were severe. She needs medical attention. Annoyed, Qui-Gon gazed out at the water to buy time. He knew Neild was blackmailing him, forcing him to bend to his wishes so that Qui-Gon could fulfill his mission. He had been outmaneuvered by a child. And Obi-Wan, he saw, was enjoying it. Another curl of apprehension registered along his spirit. He turned back to Neild and Sarasi. All right, he said. Obi-Wan and I will wait for you to bring us a Tall. Our primary objective is her rescue. After that, you're on your own. Is that good enough? Neild grinned. It is all we need. Chapter 9. Back at the tunnel, preparations began. Neild and Sarasi huddled with the rest of the young, deep in conversation. Obi-Wan sat quietly at the table, watching them. The determination on their faces told him that whatever the outcome, the Don and the Melita were both in for a big surprise at dawn the next day. Qui-Gon paced on the other side of the room, displaying a rare show of impatience. If you need help with strategy, he began. Sarasi turned. No, she said curtly. We don't need any help. Another opinion can only strengthen your odds, Qui-Gon said quietly. This time, Sarasi didn't bother to turn. Neild did not even look up. We do not want your help, Jedi, Sarasi said, even more sharply than before. Obi-Wan glanced at Qui-Gon to gauge his reaction. He saw his master struggle with his irritation. But although Qui-Gon could be impulsive, he was never petty. The irritation left him, and his usual mask of calm returned. Padawan, I am going to explore the tunnels, he told Obi-Wan in a low voice. It is better not to rely totally on the young to guide us. You remain here. Obi-Wan nodded. For once, he didn't want to accompany Qui-Gon. He wanted to stay and watch the young plan the battle. Sarasi divided the young people into teams and assigned them tasks. They worked on makeshift weapons fashioned from scraps. Their most prominent weapon was a powerful slingshot that threw laser balls. The balls could only sting a life form if they connected, but if they hit a hard object, they made a sound like blaster fire. Over the course of the afternoon, Obi-Wan tried to grow used to the muffled sound of explosions. War toys were part of the childhood of both Melita and Don. The young were modifying them to amplify their sound effects. They worked in the rooms branching off the main tunnel on missile tubes, packing them with pebbles and paint. Sarasi worked on a pile of slingshots in a corner, honing them with a sharp knife and testing their accuracy with wadded-up flimsy plast. The flimsy plast winged across the high space, hitting the same stone block with deadly accuracy. Sarasi worked tirelessly, without a break. I'd like to help, Obi-Wan said, approaching her. Not with strategy, he added quickly. I know you have that under control, but I can help with this. Sarasi pushed a lock of hair from her eyes and smiled slightly. I guess I was hard on your boss, Master, huh? He's not my boss, really, Obi-Wan said. That's not the Jedi way. He's more of a guide. Sure, whatever you say, but if you ask me, elders always think they know best. They just get in the way. She handed a knife to Obi-Wan. If you can hone it to the same thickness as the ones I did, we could get these done in a flash. Obi-Wan sat and began to scrape the knife against the supple wood. What do you think our chances of success are tomorrow? Excellent, Sarasi said firmly. We're relying on the hatred of the two sectors. All we need to do is create the illusion of battle. Both sides will react without bothering to verify reports of blaster fire and torpedo launches. They expect warfare any moment. Your battle may be an illusion, but the danger is not, Obi-Wan pointed out. Both sides will have real weapons to fire. Sarasi shook her head. I'm not afraid. Awareness of fear can protect you if it does not overtake you, Obi-Wan replied. Sarasi snorted. Is that one of your boss master's Jedi sayings? Obi-Wan flushed. Yes, and I have found it to be true. Awareness of fear is an instinct that warns you to be careful. Anyone going into battle who says they are not afraid is a fool. Well, call me a fool, patted Jedi, Sarasi said flatly. I'm not afraid. Ah, Obi-Wan said lightly. You go into glorious battle without fear, confident that your filthy enemy will collapse. He was repeating the vain boasts of the dead in the halls of evidence, and Sarasi knew it. She flushed as Obi-Wan had a moment before. More Jedi wisdom. It's a wonder you managed to survive this long if you keep pointing out what foolish things people say. Sarasi finally said with a half-smile. Okay, I get your point. I'm no better than my ancestors, marching blindly into a battle I will lose. I'm not saying you will lose. Sarasi paused, fully seeing Obi-Wan for the first time. Well, maybe I'll feel afraid on the day of the battle, but today I feel ready. This is the first step toward justice. I can't wait to take it. Do you have any wisdom about that? No, Obi-Wan admitted. Sarasi was unlike anyone he'd ever met before. Justice is something to fight for. If I didn't believe that, I wouldn't be a Jedi. Sarasi put down her slingshot. Being a Jedi is as much a part of you as being part of the young is to me, she observed, her crystal green eyes studying him. I guess the difference is that the young don't have any guides. We guide ourselves. Being an apprentice is a journey that is an honor to undertake, Obi-Wan replied. But he feared his words were weak. He was used to saying them and believing them with his whole heart. Being a Jedi was at the core of him, but in just a few hours with the young, he had seen a commitment that had confused him as much as it had stirred him. Of course, he had seen deep commitment at the temple among the Jedi students, but with some students there often seemed to be pride mixed in. They were the elite, picked out of millions to be trained. Whenever Yoda saw pride in a Jedi student, he found ways to expose it and put the student on the right path. Pride was often based in arrogance, and it had no place in a Jedi. Part of the Jedi training was to eliminate pride and substitute sureness and humility. The Force only flourished in those who knew they were connected to all life forms. Here in the tunnels, Obi-Wan saw a pureness he had only glimpsed in his talks with Yoda, or his observance of Qui-Gon. That pureness was in people his own age. They did not have to strive for it. They possessed it. Perhaps because the cause they believed in was more than a concept in their minds. It was bred in their blood and bones, born in their suffering. He felt defensive, as though Sarasi had attacked his dedication to the Jedi way. Nield is the leader of the young, he pointed out, so you too have a boss. Nield is the best at strategy, Sarasi said. If we didn't have someone to organize us, we would fall apart. And someone to punish you? Obi-Wan asked, remembering how Nield had almost strangled a boy. Sarasi hesitated. Her voice softened as she continued. Nield may seem harsh to you, but he has to be. Hatred was taught to us before we could walk. We have to be firm to stamp it out. Our vision of a new world can only survive if our hatred dies. We must forget everything we were taught. We must begin again. Nield knows this better than anyone, perhaps because he's had it harder than any of us here. In what way? Obi-Wan asked. Sarasi sighed. She put down the slingshot she'd been working on. That last hologram he triggered, the one he mocked, was Nield's father. He went into a battle with Nield's 3 brothers. They all died. Nield was 5 years old. 1 month later, his mother made preparations to be part of the next great battle. She left him with a cousin, a young girl who was more like a sister to him. His mother went off to fight, and she was killed too. Then the Melita invaded his village. His cousin escaped and took him to Sihava. He had a few peaceful years, but then the Dawn attacked the Melita sector and his cousin had to fight. She was 17, old enough then. She died too. Nield was left on the streets to fend for himself. He was 8 years old. There were those who tried to care for him. He wouldn't live with anyone, but he did take shelter and food when he needed it. He didn't want to depend on anyone ever again. Can you blame him? Obi-Wan pictured all those people who loved Nield, all of them dying, one after the other. No, he said softly. I don't blame him at all. Sarasi sighed. The point is, I was raised to think of the Dawn as beasts, barely human. Nield was the first Dawn I knew. He was the one who united both the Dawn and the Melita orphans. He walked into the care centers and gathered them up, promised them freedom and peace. Then he made sure they had it. If they had stayed in the care center, eventually they'd be taken in a sweep. A sweep? Obi-Wan asked. Both Melita and Dawn rely on the orphaned children for factory work or conscription if they're old enough, Sarasi said flatly. They either work or fight. It's easy to find them in the city care centers. In the towns and villages, the children just run away. Where do they go? Sarasi frowned. They live off the land and scavenge. There are whole tribes of children beyond the city's walls. Neil has worked hard to organize them too. They keep in contact with stolen comlinks. They don't want any more war. Sarasi turned to him. So you asked me what our chances of success will be, and I know I answered you. But truly, I can't even think of chances or odds. We will succeed because we have to. Our world is becoming a wasteland, Obi-Wan. Only we can stop it. Obi-Wan nodded. He felt himself beginning to understand Sarasi. He saw that her briskness masked deep feeling. We could use your help, though, Sarasi went on. You have ties to the Jedi Council, and they have ties to Coruscant. You can show the entire galaxy that our cause is just. Jedi support means everything. Sarasi, I can't promise you Jedi support, Obi-Wan said quietly. Surprising himself, he put his hand over hers. I can only promise you mine. Her bright gaze held his. Why don't you come with Neil and me tomorrow? We're doing the first raid into Dawn territory. Obi-Wan hesitated. As a Jedi Apprentice, he'd be breaking the rules if he agreed without asking Qui-Gon's permission. But if he asked, Qui-Gon would most likely refuse. He had already broken the rules by pledging his own support to Sarasi and her cause. That promise could conflict with the Jedi mission. But he couldn't help himself. The cause of the young spoke directly and urgently to his heart. As a Jedi, he didn't fight for his own family, his own world, or his own people. He fought for what Yoda and the Council, and Qui-Gon, decided he should fight for. Sarasi and Neil had defined their own struggle. Obi-Wan was stuck with a pang of deep envy for them. He had spent so much time with those older than himself. He had listened so often to their wisdom. Now he felt welcomed back into something different. He could be a part of a community here. He hadn't realized how much he missed a community of boys and girls his own age. Sarasi's hand felt warm beneath his own. Her fingers were slender and delicate. Suddenly, they intertwined with his and squeezed, and he felt their strength. Will you come? She asked. Yes, he said. I will. Chapter 10. That night the young rolled sleeping quilts under the tombs. Qui-Gon found an open space near one of the adjacent tunnel entrances where the air was fresh. Obi-Wan approached him awkwardly. Neil and Sarasi have asked me to share their quarters, he said. They watch over the youngest children. Qui-Gon gave him a questioning look, but he nodded. Sleep well, Padawan. Obi-Wan picked up a sleeping quilt and returned to Neil and Sarasi. They slept in a small anteroom off the vault. Neil put a finger to his lips as Obi-Wan entered. The children are asleep, he whispered. We should be sleeping as well. We'll need all our rest for tomorrow. He put his hand on Obi-Wan's forearm. Sarasi told me you will join us. I'm honored. It is my honor to help you, Obi-Wan answered. He settled himself on the floor next to Neil and Sarasi. He thought he wouldn't be able to sleep, but the children's quiet breathing lulled him. It was hard to tell what time it was when he awoke. Sarasi rose from her sleeping area and leaned over Neil to touch his shoulder. Neil was already awake and stood immediately. Obi-Wan stood as well. He was ready. He was acting not as a Jedi, but as a person, a friend. He grabbed his lightsaber and the slingshot Sarasi had given him the night before. There was an entrance from the anteroom directly into the tunnel toward Dawn. Qui-Gon wouldn't see him leave. Obi-Wan knew he was wrong not to ask permission, but he wasn't sure how angry Qui-Gon would be when he discovered he was gone. After all, Qui-Gon himself had offered to help with strategy for the battle. Obi-Wan was glad he'd made the decision as he joined Neil and Sarasi on the deserted streets of the Dawn-controlled outer circle. The three moved as one unit in the chilly, early morning air. They walked purposely down the deserted streets, their soft footfalls barely making a sound. Neil and Sarasi had already decided on their first targets. They shimmied up a pipe and climbed onto the roof of a dwelling. From here they could see the sun, more a suggestion of gathering light than a source of radiance. I hate to wake everybody up, Neil said, flashing a grin. It's time they were out of bed anyway. Sarasi held up a toy missile tube. I'm ready. Obi-Wan had clipped various projectiles onto his belt. He stuffed one into the missile tube. The projectiles had been fashioned around tiny amplifiers so that the sound they made when they hit would mimic the sound of a real proton missile. Sarasi and Neild had chosen a street that would echo the sound. "Let's go," Obi-Wan agreed. Sarasi aimed the toy missile at the abandoned building across the street. She fired. The loud sound of the explosion surprised them. "Listen to that! It worked!" Neild exulted. He fit a laser ball into a slingshot and fired at the wall across the street. The unmistakable ping, 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 a blaster fire erupted. Obi-Wan quickly stuffed another projectile into the tube, and Sarasi shot it off. The blam echoed off the building fronts below. Neild continued to shoot laser balls from his slingshot, and Obi-Wan followed suit. They shot ball after ball, reloading and firing rapidly. The sound of blaster fire echoed down the street. Someone emerged from a door across the way and looked up and down the street quickly. Neild and Obi-Wan shot a rain of laser balls into an abandoned building, where no one would see them land. Crack, crack, crack! The laser balls hit the solid surface, making an even louder sound. The Don quickly darted back into the building. "He'll sound an alert," Neild said. "We're done here. Let's go." Jumping from building to building, they made their way to another quiet street. They repeated the procedure, then moved on. Racing now, they fired down randomly with laser balls where Sarasi shot projectiles, where their explosive sound would echo the most. While they moved from block to block, they shifted barricades where they could to block any military vehicles. At checkpoints, they rained their false weapon fire over the heads of the guards, who took defensive postures, sweeping the empty streets with infrared binoculars to look for the unseen attackers. The sun rose, and sirens began to sound over the city. Neild turned to them. The rising sun reflected red off his dark hair. "Now for military headquarters." Excitement coursed through Obi-Wan. It was almost like a game, this ruse that Neild and Sarasi had concocted. But now the game would get serious. Hitting a military target, even with fake explosives, would be dangerous. Neild led the way across the rooftops to the Don military headquarters. From the roof of a building across the street, Obi-Wan could see soldiers running toward land speeders, carrying blasters and torpedo launchers. Obviously, they were hurrying to investigate the many alarms that had sprung up. "So far, so good," Sarasi breathed. "There won't be as many soldiers around." This part would be tricky. They would not be firing at houses full of sleeping civilians. The military would react swiftly. But Neild had pointed out that if they did not convince the military that an attack had been launched, their plan wouldn't work. If the military thought they were under fire as well, they might conclude that this was not random sniper fire, but a full-scale attack. In addition to Neild, Sarasi, and Obi-Wan, other groups of the young should have been heading out to other Don and Melita neighborhoods. Their attacks would be launched simultaneously with the attack on military headquarters. They waited until the soldiers had taken off in their speeders. 2 guards stood outside behind transparent armored shields. Sarasi loaded her beam tube. Obi-Wan and Neild placed laser balls in their slingshots. On the whispered count of 3 from Sarasi, they fired. The laser balls hit the building, sounding like blaster fire. The projectile boomed. Already the 3 had loaded and shot again, then quickly scuttled back on their hands and knees and ran to the edge of the roof to jump to the adjoining building. They fired again. Soldiers streamed out of the building in full plastoid armor, blasters in hand. Electro-binoculars were trained on the street and buildings above. Armored plates rattled down over windows and doors. A siren blasted insistently. Soldiers began to spread out down the street. Floaters took off for air surveillance. Armored vehicles poured out from an underground holding station. "It's time to get out of here," Sarasi said. Stuffing the toys and slingshots under their belts, they dashed across the rooftop and quickly shimmied down a drain pipe. When they hit the street, they slowed their pace, trying to look like Don teenagers out for a morning walk. "You there! Halt!" They froze. The voice had come from behind them. Neild had already given them identity cards, so they thought they'd be able to pass. Sarasi slipped a package out of her tunic. Obi-Wan glanced at her, puzzled. Did she have a weapon? Of course he had his lightsaber, but he would never be able to take on the troops swarming over the streets. He would only endanger Sarasi and Neild. They turned and saw 3 soldiers approaching them, blasters aimed straight at their hearts. "Identity cards," one soldier said in a clipped tone. Quickly, the 3 handed them over. Neild had given Obi-Wan a disc from a Don boy who was his age and weight. The soldiers inserted the discs into a readout machine. Obi-Wan waited for them to hand them back, but instead the first soldier gave him a look at the other two to keep them. He was still suspicious. He gave Neild, Sarasi, and Obi-Wan a hard look. "Is there anything wrong?" Neild asked worriedly. "What do you have there?" The first soldier pointed at Sarasi's package with his blaster. "Muja muffins," Sarasi stammered nervously. She held out the package. "For breakfast. We go every morning." "Let me see." The soldier opened the top of the package. Inside, Obi-Wan saw a row of muffins wrapped in napkins. "What's on your belts?" the other soldier asked. "Aren't you a little old for toys?" "We're practicing for the army," Neild answered. He lifted his chin. "We can't wait to fight the filthy Melita." "What's that?" The soldier pointed to Obi-Wan's lightsaber. Obi-Wan held it up and activated it. "The newest toy on Gala. My grandfather sells them over on Victory Street." The soldiers eyed it. "We never had toys like that when we were young," the first said ruefully. "In the next battle of Zihava, the Dawn will prevail," Obi-Wan answered, waving his lightsaber. "We might be in the next battle of Zihava right now, so hurry around and take shelter," the third soldier said gruffly. He handed Neild back his identity card and motioned for the other soldiers to do the same. "You may be fighting with real weapons before long." The three soldiers marched off, their comlinks crackling with reports of more attacks in the city. "That was close," Sarasi breathed. "I'm glad I brought those Muja muffins. It gave us a reason to be on the street so early." "And I thought you brought them in case I was hungry," Obi-Wan managed to tease. His heartbeat was returning to normal. He didn't want to think about how Qui-Gon would have reacted if he had been captured by the Dawn. "That was a smart move, to activate that lightsaber and call it a toy," Neild said to Obi-Wan. "Lucky for you they were too dumb to realize you were a Jedi." Sarasi eyed him. I have a feeling Obi-Wan was ready to use it. Neild grinned broadly. "I have a feeling he can save us all." The three laughed together in relief. Obi-Wan felt a current run between himself and Sarasi and Neild. Even though he was still in danger, he had never felt so free. Chapter 11. Qui-Gon sat in the shadows, watching the furious activity of the young as they dashed in and out of the vault for supplies, then hurried out to return to the streets above. Something had woken him before dawn, a soft flurry of movement. He had seen Obi-Wan leave with Sarasi and Neild. He had let his Padawan go. It would have been easy to step forward and challenge Obi-Wan. Qui-Gon's anger had surged, and he had wanted to confront the boy. Obi-Wan had no right to leave without permission. He had violated Qui-Gon's trust. It was a small violation, but it stung. He and Obi-Wan had not yet achieved the perfect mind communion of the Master-Padawan relationship. They had merely taken a few steps in a long journey together. They occasionally had disagreements and misunderstandings, but Obi-Wan had never deliberately concealed something from him before. Obviously, Obi-Wan was afraid that Qui-Gon would not let him go. The boy was right. He would have forbidden it. Qui-Gon believed the young sincerely wanted peace, but he wasn't sure if they would follow through with their good intentions if they gained any sort of power. He saw much anger in them. Obi-Wan saw only passion. At last, Neild, Sarasi, and Obi-Wan returned. Qui-Gon let out a slow breath of relief. He had started to worry. "Time for Phase 2, Neild said as the three entered the vault. "We go for the weapons storage on both sides." "What about Tal?" Qui-Gon asked. "Sarasi will lead you to Tal," Neild said. "Dila?" A tall, slender girl paused as she loaded more projectiles into pouches that hung from her belt. "Yes?" "How's it going on the Melita side?" She grinned. "Chaos. They think the Dawn are everywhere, even in their closets." "Good." Neild turned back to Qui-Gon. "There should be enough confusion for you to slip through. Sarasi will bring you, but you'll have to rescue Tal on your own." "That's fine," Qui-Gon agreed. He didn't want to put the girl in danger. Obi-Wan didn't meet his master's gaze as the two Jedi followed Sarasi into a narrow tunnel that led off the vault. Qui-Gon pushed his anger aside. He would not confront Obi-Wan about sneaking out. Not yet. He turned his mind to the task ahead. He had to focus on Tal now. Sarasi led them through a maze of tunnels until they came to a grate. Pale gray light filtered down. "We are underneath the building where Tall is being held," she whispered. "This will lead you to a lower level of the military barracks. Tall is being held in a room 3 doors to the right. There will be guards there, but probably not as many as there were before. Every soldier is needed on the streets." "How many were there before?" Qui-Gon asked in a low murmur. "That's the bad news," Sarasi said ruefully. "She's guarded by only 2 guards, but right around the corner is the main quarters for soldiers. It's where they come to eat and sleep, so there are always plenty of soldiers walking back and forth. That's why Neild and I figured you needed a diversion." She pointed overhead. "The grate leads directly into a grain storage area, so you can climb out without being seen." "Thank you, Sarasi," Qui-Gon said quietly. "We can find our own way back." But when Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan emerged into a small storage area crowded with sacks of grain, Sarasi's head popped out of the grate after them. "I thought you were going back," Obi-Wan whispered. She grinned. "I have a feeling you'll need my help." She dangled her slingshot. "A diversion might come in handy." Obi-Wan returned her grin, but Qui-Gon frowned. "I don't want to put you in danger, Sarasi. That's not our deal," Neild said. "I make my own decisions, Qui-Gon," Sarasi interrupted. "I'm offering my help. I know the layout. Will you accept my offer or not?" Sarasi's chin stuck out challengingly. Her crystal eyes glinted at Qui-Gon. "All right," he said. "But if Obi-Wan and I get in trouble, you leave. Do you promise me?" "I promise," Sarasi agreed. Qui-Gon eased the door open a crack and surveyed the area. A long hallway was lined with heavy metal doors. One soldier hurried down the hall and disappeared around a turning. 2 soldiers were posted as guards outside one of the doors. It was where Tall was being held. A soldier headed toward him, moving fast. Qui-Gon faded back, but kept close to the opening. "Going back out there?" one of the guards asked. "We've got an invasion on our hands," the soldier said curtly. "Just got news of an attack only 2 blocks away. I've got to find my unit." The guards exchanged nervous glances. "We're sitting ducks in here," the first one muttered. "We should be out there fighting. This duty's a waste of time anyway. I don't care if she is a Jedi. She's too weak to be a threat." "She's done for," the other guard said. "It won't be long." Rage and pain rose in Qui-Gon. It couldn't be too late. He controlled the anger and called on the Force to help him. He knew Obi-Wan was doing the same, for the Force was suddenly a presence in the room, surging around them. "Qui-Gon," Sarasi whispered, "I have an idea. Will you listen?" "Do I have a choice?" Qui-Gon responded. Sarasi moved closer and whispered her plan in his ear. "All right," he said, "but then you leave. Agreed?" Sarasi nodded. Then she eased open the door and slipped out. It took a moment for the guards to notice her. Sarasi hurried toward them, her expression stricken. "Halt!" the guards called. "What?" Sarasi asked, distracted. She kept on moving. "Halt or we'll shoot," the guards warned. Sarasi stopped. She wrung her hands together. "But my father is here. I have to see him." "Who is your father?" Sarasi drew herself up. "We Huddy, the great hero. I must tell him that my Aunt Sony is dead. She was blown up by a foul Dawn proton grenade. You must let me pass." "You are what, Huddy's daughter?" "Yes, look, I have an identity card." Sarasi showed the guards her Melita card. One of the guards took it, then swiped it down his readout. When he handed it back to her, his voice was kind. "I haven't seen wee Huddy here. He's most likely on the streets. We're being invaded, you know." "You think I don't know that?" Sarasi cried. "The Dawn are taking the hub block by block. They'll be here any minute. I need my father. He promised he'd be here if I needed him. He promised." Sarasi's voice wobbled. With her slight figure and her quavering voice, she seemed younger than she was. The guards exchanged a glance. "All right, but then you've got to clear out and seek shelter," the second one said. Sarasi hurried down the hall and turned the corner. A moment passed, then another. Qui-Gon waited patiently. He had confidence in Sarasi. She would need time to circle around to the other side of the guards. Suddenly, the sound of blaster fire echoed down the hallway in the direction opposite from where Sarasi had appeared. The 2 guards exchanged glances. "Dawn!" the first guard hissed. The girl was right. They're attacking. Qui-Gon was out the door, lightsaber in hand, before the guards could turn and react. Obi-Wan raced alongside him. The guards fired their blasters rapidly as soon as they saw the Jedi, but they were too late. Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon deflected the fire with their lightsabers without missing a step. Moving in sync, they jumped the last few meters to the guards, feet first. Deflecting blaster fire with their lightsabers, they hit the guards in the chest with a powerful kick. The guards flew back, their blasters flying out of their hands. "Cover me," Qui-Gon instructed Obi-Wan crisply. He moved to the door. As he began to slice through the lock with his lightsaber, the guards recovered and reached for the electro jabbers on their belts. Obi-Wan didn't wait for them to rise. He leaped over them so they would need to turn and twist to attack. He knocked the electro jabber out of one guard's hand with a kick and sliced down with his lightsaber toward the other. The guard howled and dropped his weapon. "Don't move," Obi-Wan warned them, keeping his lightsaber over their heads. The lock gave and Qui-Gon pushed open the door. He stopped, stricken at the heart by Tal's appearance. She had gone through temple training with him. She had always been beautiful, a tall woman from the planet Nuri, with eyes striped gold and green and skin the color of dark honey. Now she appeared thin and wasted. Her beautiful skin was marred by a white scar that ran from one eye and curved around her chin. The other eye was covered with a patch. "Tal," he said, keeping his voice steady. "It's Qui-Gon." "Ah, rescue at last," she said in the gently mocking tone that always made him smile. "Do I look that bad, old friend?" He realized then that she could not see. "You look as lovely as ever," he said. "But can you wait on the compliments? My hands are full at the moment." "I'm afraid I'm a little weak," Tal confessed. "I'll carry you." Qui-Gon scooped up Tal in his arms. She felt as light as a child. "Can you hang on to my neck?" he asked. He felt her nod as her arms tightened around him. "Just get me out of here," she said. "I've had better food in a hut cantina." Just then Qui-Gon heard the sound he'd hoped he wouldn't. Rapid blaster fire. Reinforcements had arrived. Obi-Wan was in trouble. His time had run out. He proceeded cautiously to the door. He peered out. 6 soldiers had charged out of their quarters and were shooting at Obi-Wan from the end of the hall. Obi-Wan had flung open a door and was using it for cover. The soldiers had rearmed the 2 on the ground, so there were now 8 soldiers to fight. "What's the bad news?" Tal asked. 8 so far," Qui-Gon said. "Maybe more coming." "Piece of cake for you," she said weakly. "Just what I was about to say." Blaster fire rebounded off the door that Obi-Wan crouched behind. The doors were armored, Obi-Wan realized. They could use it to their advantage. Qui-Gon flung his own door wide open and stepped out behind it, making a quick calculation. Obi-Wan had held off the soldiers so far by periodically deflecting blaster fire back at them with his lightsaber, but they would soon realize he wasn't armed with a blaster. Then they would rush him. Qui-Gon looked over at Obi-Wan. It was time to take the offensive again. But he couldn't endanger Tal, and she was too weak to walk. They were stuck. He would not leave Tal. He didn't even want to put her down again. If he was separated from her, he might not be able to get to her again. "Leave me, Qui-Gon," Tal murmured to him. "I'll be no worse off than I was before. Do not let them capture you, too." "Have a little faith, will you?" Qui-Gon countered gently. Suddenly, blaster fire erupted from the opposite end of the hall. Now they were surrounded. But after a moment, Qui-Gon realized that the blaster fire was directed at the soldiers. Or, he realized suddenly, at least it sounded like blaster fire. Sarasi hadn't left after creating a diversion as she'd promised. The soldiers dived around the corner for cover. Qui-Gon glanced back down the other end just in time to see Sarasi fire another laser ball. It hit the wall, and blaster fire echoed down the hall. The guards now fired blindly, unwilling to risk exposure by coming around the corner. Obi-Wan stepped out. He was easily able to deflect the wild shots with his lightsaber. Holding Tal against his chest with one arm, Qui-Gon raised his lightsaber to catch any blaster fire that Obi-Wan was unable to deflect. Together, they moved backward down the hallway toward the storage room. As they moved, Obi-Wan flung open door after door. They swung outward, helping to block blaster fire. The soldiers kept up a steady stream of fire, but Sarasi loaded and shot laser balls just as fast, and the soldiers were convinced they were under attack. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan reached the safety of the storage room. Sarasi dashed forward. Hurry, she urged. I'm running low. She continued shooting as Obi-Wan slid back the grate, and Qui-Gon climbed down one-handed, Tall hugging his neck. Now! Obi-Wan yelled. Sarasi hurried down after Qui-Gon. Obi-Wan followed, setting the grate back in place. Thank you, Sarasi. Qui-Gon spoke quietly. We could not have done this without your bravery. Obi-Wan helped us this morning, Sarasi replied carelessly, as if risking her life for nothing. I just returned the favor. Why did you think of claiming to be Wihadi's daughter? Obi-Wan asked her as she led the way back. Because I am, Sarasi answered. But you said your father was dead, Obi-Wan pointed out. He is dead to me, Sarasi replied with a shrug, but occasionally he comes in handy, just like most elders. She looked over her shoulder at Obi-Wan and flashed him a grin. Obi-Wan's eyes shone back. Qui-Gon saw in the moment of their exchange that something had deepened between them. They were intimates now, communicating without words. The adventure they had shared that morning had united them. Qui-Gon felt his earlier anger drain away. He supposed that Obi-Wan had a lonely existence at times, traveling with someone older than himself. He must miss being with boys and girls his own age. It was good that he could bond so strongly with another. Why should it make Qui-Gon so uneasy? Chapter 12. Qui-Gon settled tall into a nest of quilts and blankets, the best the young had to offer. He stood over her for a moment. She had tired from the short battle, and she fell asleep almost immediately. He could feel the flicker of her living force, but it was only a flicker. Tal's memory of how she got her injuries was gone. She remembered being caught in the middle of a battle, but she could not remember being wounded or blinded. Qui-Gon sat back against the wall to think. Their mission was over. They had only to wait until the fighting died down. Sarasi had assured him that she could get the Jedi out of the city without endangering Tal. He would bring Tal back to Coruscant and hoped that the Jedi healing arts would bring her back to the vibrant strength he remembered so well. Qui-Gon knew he would leave behind a world in chaos, children battling to save it, elders locked in conflict, willing to sacrifice the population for their cause. Yet he must leave. His first duty was to get Tal back. Then he would ask Yoda's permission to return. The Jedi Master would not grant it, most likely. The Jedi did not go to worlds and meddle in their affairs unless they were requested to do so. Only in extraordinary circumstances would they interfere, or if a world was threatening the peace and security of others. The inhabitants of Melita Dawn were locked in its conflict, hurting no other world but their own. Obi-Wan had asked permission to go above ground with Sarasi. Qui-Gon had granted it. He knew that when he told Obi-Wan they must leave, his Padawan would not want to go. Yet Obi-Wan would obey him. It was his first duty as a Padawan, and Obi-Wan was a Jedi to the bone. Their mission was close to success, yet foreboding lodged in Qui-Gon's chest like a heavy stone. His instinct was warning him, but he could not place what the warning was, or how it would affect him. He heard running footsteps, and Neil burst into the room with Obi-Wan and Sarasi. Qui-Gon was struck with how the three moved in the same rhythm, their strides matching perfectly, despite Obi-Wan's long legs and Sarasi's more slender build. "Gather round, everyone," Neil cried. "We have news." Neil leaped up on top of the grandest tomb. Boys and girls swarmed around him, coming from the strategy stations around the room and from the adjoining tunnels. They turned expectant faces up to him. "Our battle is over," Neil said. "We've achieved total victory." The young cheered wildly. Neil held up a hand. "Our raid on the weapons storehouse of the Dawn was a success. We've stolen the weapons the Dawn did not waste in attacking the Melita or shooting at imaginary attackers. We've deposited them in the North Tunnel. The Melita," Neil paused, grinned, "blew up their own storehouses so that the Dawn would not get their weapons." The young let out wild hoots of laughter. They shouted with joy. "We have delivered our messages to both sides, letting them know that the young were behind the battles, and that we have succeeded in stealing their arms. Without weapons, the elders cannot fight each other. Today we've taken a giant step toward peace." Exhilaration raced through the room like a current. Qui-Gon watched as Neil leaned down and grabbed Sarasi's hand. He pulled her up to stand next to him. Then he reached down for Obi-Wan. Smiling, Obi-Wan leaped up on the tomb to take his place beside the two leaders. The young reached up to touch his tunic. Obi-Wan reached down to touch their hands and accept their congratulations. He linked arms with Sarasi and kneeled. Never once did he glance at Qui-Gon. It was as though the Jedi Knight wasn't in the room. It was as though Obi-Wan was not a Jedi. It was as though he was part of them. As though he had become one of the young. Chapter 13. Qui-Gon left the main room and found a quiet place in an adjoining tunnel to contact Yoda. The Jedi Master appeared in miniature hologram form. Quickly, Qui-Gon filled him in on the situation and the rescue of Tal. Yoda passed a hand over his forehead in distress. "Relieved I am to hear this news," he said. "Concerned I am to hear that Tal is ailing. Needs care, she does." "I will leave as soon as she's stronger and it is safe," Qui-Gon promised. "But I leave a situation here on Melita Dawn that is volatile." Yoda nodded several times. "Heard you, I have, Qui-Gon. But remind you I must that neither the Melita or the Dawn have asked for our help. Almost sacrificed one Jedi I did. Willingly sacrificed two more? I am not." "We could bring Tal back and then return," Qui-Gon pointed out. Yoda paused. "Before the Jedi Council you must go," he said finally. "Make this decision alone I cannot. Cared for Tal must be. Then decide we will if help we must give. Until then, taking sides the Jedi must not do. Jeopardize peace it would. Avoid you must, angering one side or another." As usual, Yoda had a point. Already the Melita would be angry when they heard that the Jedi had broken into their barracks, and if word got out that Obi-Wan had gone on the raid into Dawn territory, that would anger the Dawn. He bowed. "I hope to find Tal ready tomorrow. I will return soon, Master." "Look forward to that day, I will," Yoda said gently. The hologram flickered and disappeared. "Go back? We can't go back," Obi-Wan exclaimed. "We can't leave the young now. They need us." "We have received no official request to stabilize the planet," Qui-Gon said patiently. "Perhaps back on Coruscant, the Jedi Council will." "We can't wait for the Council to review this," Obi-Wan interrupted, shaking his head. "If we wait too long, the Melita and the Dawn will rearm. The time to act is now." "Obi-Wan, listen to me," Qui-Gon said sternly. "Yoda has directed us to come back. Tal needs care." "She needs rest and med care," Obi-Wan argued. "We can get that for her here. Sarasi can tell me where to go. We can bring a medic back here, or find a place to keep her that would be safe." "No," Qui-Gon said, shaking his head. "She must be brought back to the temple. We can do no more here, Padawan. We will leave tomorrow." "Part of our mission was to try to stabilize the planet if we could," Obi-Wan insisted. "We haven't done that, but we can if we stay." "We have not been asked." "We have been asked. By the young," Obi-Wan exclaimed. "That is not an official request," Qui-Gon replied testily. The boy was beginning to try his patience. "You've broken the rules before, Qui-Gon," Obi-Wan argued. "Back on Gala, you left me to travel to the hill country when you were instructed to stay at the palace. You break the rules when it suits you to do so." Qui-Gon took a deep breath, trying to control his temper. He would not match Obi-Wan's anger with his own. "I break the rules not because it suits me, but because sometimes during a mission the rules get in the way," he said carefully. "That is not the case here. I believe Yoda is right." "But," Obi-Wan interrupted, but Qui-Gon held up a hand. "Tomorrow we will leave, Padawan," he said firmly. Suddenly, a roar rose from the young, who were gathered in the far corner of the vault. Sarasi ran over to the Jedi, her face beaming. "It is official!" she cried. "In the absence of a response to our request for peace, we have issued a declaration of war on the Elders. If they do not agree immediately to Melita Dawn peace negotiations, we will attack them with their own weapons. They must respond to us now." She turned shining eyes to Obi-Wan. "This is the last push we must do to change the history of Melita Dawn. We need your help more than ever."
Chapter 14. Choked with anger and frustration, Obi-Wan could not answer Sarasi. It was Qui-Gon who said gently, "I'm sorry, Sarasi. We must leave tomorrow." Obi-Wan didn't wait to see Sarasi's reaction. He could only turn away, sick at heart. He had let her down. It was no use. He couldn't change Qui-Gon's mind. Silently, Obi-Wan helped him minister to Tal. They prepared and fed her broth and tea. Sarasi had brought Qui-Gon a med pack, and he was able to treat some of Tal's wounds. Already she seemed stronger. She would be ready to travel by tomorrow, Obi-Wan knew. The Jedi powers of recuperation were remarkable. As soon as Tal was settled, Obi-Wan sat against the wall and tried to calm his raging heart. Something was happening to him he didn't understand. He felt as though there were two parts of him, a Jedi and a person called Obi-Wan. Always before, he could not separate being a Jedi from being himself. He had not been a Jedi with Neild and Sarasi. He had been one of them. He had not needed the Force to feel connected to something larger than himself. Now Qui-Gon was asking him to leave his friends just as they needed him. He had pledged to help them, had battled alongside them, and now he had to go, just because an elder told him so. Loyalty had seemed such an easy concept back at the temple. He had thought that he would be the best Padawan it was possible to be. He would meld his mind and body with his master and serve. But he did not want to serve like this. Obi-Wan closed his eyes as his frustration again boiled up inside him. He pressed his hands between his knees to calm their shaking. He felt frightened at what was happening to him. He couldn't go to Qui-Gon for counsel. He didn't believe in his master's counsel any longer, yet neither could he oppose it. Across the room, Neild was just as agitated, prowling around the headquarters silently. Everyone was waiting for the Melita and Don councils to respond to the declaration of war. The long evening shaded into night, and still no word came. They did not take us seriously, Neild said bitterly. We must strike again, and strike hard enough to make them sit up and take notice. Sarasi put her hand on his arm. But not tonight. Everyone needs rest. Tomorrow we can plan. Neild nodded. Sarasi lowered the glow rods until they were only faint spots of illumination against the dark walls, like distant stars in a black sky. Qui-Gon rolled himself up in his cloak and went to sleep by Tal's side, in case she called for him in the night. Obi-Wan watched as the boys and girls around him settled into exhausted sleep. Over in the corner, he saw Sarasi and Neild headed together, talking quietly. I should be with them, Obi-Wan thought bitterly. He belonged with them, talking about strategy and plans. Instead, he had to sit silently, passively, watching their dedication, their fire. Sarasi hadn't looked at him once during the long evening. Neild hadn't either. They were no doubt disappointed and angry. Hesitantly, Obi-Wan rose. Even if he left them tomorrow, they had to know that he had no choice. He walked softly among the sleeping children and approached them. I wanted to say goodbye now, he said. We'll be leaving early tomorrow. He paused. I'm sorry I can't stay to help you. I want to. We understand, Neild said in a clipped tone. You must obey your elder. It's not obedience as much as respect, Obi-Wan explained. His words sounded lame, even to him. Ah, Sarasi said, nodding. My trouble is I never got this respect thing. My father told me it was right, and he was always wrong. What does it matter, he'd say, if thousands die, or millions die? The sky is still blue overhead, and our world still remains. The cause is what's important, and so your Jedi boss tells you what you must do, and you do it, even though you know he's wrong, and that is called respect. She looked at Neild. Maybe I've been living in the dark too long, but I just can't see that. Obi-Wan stood awkwardly in front of them. He felt confused. The Jedi way had always shimmered clear as a fountain of pure water to him, but Sarasi had muddied the water, clouded it with doubt. I would help if I could, he said finally. If there was something I knew I could do that would make a difference. Neild and Sarasi looked at each other, then back at him. What is it? Obi-Wan asked. We do have a plan, Sarasi said. Obi-Wan crouched down next to them. Tell me. Neil and Sarasi leaned closer, their foreheads almost touching Obi-Wan's. You know that there are deflection towers ringing the perimeter of the city, Sarasi whispered. There are also towers around the Melita Center. These towers control the particle shields, preventing entry, and separating Melita from Dawn. Yes, I've seen them, Obi-Wan said, nodding. Neil leaned forward. We've been in contact with the young outside the city, he said. I've sent a message to them telling them that we have succeeded in capturing the weapons of both Melita and Dawn. There are several destroyed villages ringing the city. Many of the children live there, or in the countryside. Hundreds, thousands if we take in a wider area. They're all connected by a network. If we can destroy the particle shields, they'll march on Zihava. And they have weapons, too, Sarasi added quietly. We would have an army. Not only would the elders be outnumbered, they would have nothing to fight with. We could win a war without one death, if we are careful, and the elders are smart enough to surrender. It sounds like a good plan, Obi-Wan said. But how are you going to knock out the deflection towers? That's our problem, Neil said. They can only be destroyed from the air. All we need is an air transport. We can't use floaters, Sarasi explained. The deflection towers have defense systems. Floaters wouldn't be fast enough or agile enough. We need a starfighter. Sarasi and Neil held Obi-Wan's gaze. We know you flew some sort of fast transport into Melita Dawn. Will you fly us on the mission? Sarasi asked. Obi-Wan's breath left him. Sarasi and Neil were asking a great deal. This would go beyond a Padawan's disobedience. It would defy Yoda himself. Qui-Gon would be within his rights to send him back to the temple. He would probably have to appear before the Jedi Council, and Qui-Gon would have the right to dismiss him as his Padawan. We can leave at dawn, Neil said. The mission should only take an hour, maybe a little more. Then you can take Tal back to Coruscant. The destruction of the particle shield will actually make it easier for you to smuggle Tal out of Zihava, Sarasi pointed out. But if the starfighter is damaged, it could mean she can't leave at all, Obi-Wan said. It would doom our mission to failure, and perhaps make me responsible for Tal's death. Sarasi bit her lip. It was wrong of me to mock you before, she said awkwardly, as if she were unused to apologies. I know the Jedi Code guides the way you live, and we know we're asking too much from you. If we weren't desperate, we wouldn't do it. You've done so much for us already. As you have done for us, Obi-Wan said. We could not have rescued Tal without you. It is our only chance for peace, Neil said. Once the elders see our numbers, they will have no choice but surrender. Obi-Wan glanced over at Qui-Gon's sleeping form. He owed his master so much. Qui-Gon had fought alongside him, even saved his life. They had a bond. Yet he had a bond with Neil and Sarasi, too. The shortness of the time he'd known them made no difference. The current that ran between them was like nothing he'd ever experienced. And even though Sarasi apologized for mocking him, hadn't there been a germ of truth in her words? Was it right to obey when his heart told him it was wrong? Sarasi's usual fierce green gaze had softened with compassion as she watched the struggle on his face. Neil met his gaze steadily, warmly. He, too, knew what they were asking Obi-Wan was a great sacrifice. He would have to betray Qui-Gon, betray his life as a Jedi. For them. For their cause. They could ask this because they knew they were right. Obi-Wan knew they were right, too, and he couldn't let them down. He could not make this decision as a Jedi. He would make it as a friend. He took a deep breath. I'll do it.
Chapter 15. They sneaked out before dawn. Sarasi led them to the outer circle through the tunnels. Then they left Zihava the same way Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon had arrived, through the Hall of Evidence, back to the trap. This time, Neil had brought finely spun carbon rope, which he tossed up to the surface. A strong magnet adhered to the metal slide, and they were able to scale it easily. The hike to the transport went quickly in the cool gray light. The three of them had stuffed proton grenades in their packs. They were heavy, but they hardly felt the weight. They were anxious to get to the transport and start their mission. When they reached the starfighter, Neil and Sarasi helped Obi-Wan uncover it from the branches and brush he and Qui-Gon had dragged over it. Neil beamed when he saw the sleek, small starfighter. Then he noticed the gash in the side panel.
He turned to Obi-Wan. I guess I should have asked you something. Are you a good pilot?
Obi-Wan looked at him blankly for a moment. Then Sarasi burst out laughing. Kneeled and Obi-Wan joined her, the sound bouncing off the canyon walls. I guess we'll find out, Sarasi said cheerfully. They climbed into the starfighter. Obi-Wan slid into the pilot's seat. For a moment, he hesitated, staring at the controls. The last time he'd sat here, he'd landed the craft with Qui-Gon in the co-pilot seat. Qui-Gon had kidded him about denting the side of the starfighter. Obi-Wan felt a pang of remorse. Was he doing the right thing? Was this cause worth betraying Qui-Gon? Sarasi touched his wrist gently. We know this is hard for you, Obi-Wan. That's what makes your sacrifice even more valuable to us. And we give you our deepest thanks, Neild said quietly. Obi-Wan turned and met their eyes. He felt a shock, as though he were looking at himself. In the steady gazes of his friends, he saw what was held in his own heart. The same dedication, the same fierceness, the same daring. He felt his confidence surge. He was doing the right thing. Maybe Qui-Gon would come to understand that. He started the ion engines. Let's get going. We should hit the perimeter towers first, then the center towers, Sarasi said. We're going to have to do everything by sight. I don't want to have any coordinates for the nav computer. It won't be a problem, Obi-Wan said. He kept the engines at low power as the ship rose, in order to clear the overhanging cliff. Then he pushed the engines to full power to soar above the canyon. No one told him to slow down. I'm going to have to do some defensive flying, so it's better if you two do the aiming, Obi-Wan said. The station for the laser cannon is right in front of you, Sarasi. Neild went to his own laser cannon station. I'll open up the emergency weapon sighting plate as we get closer, Obi-Wan said. Remember to keep your eyes out for speeders. We're going to have to come in low to blast the deflection controls. The 2 deflection towers flanking the main gate came into sight in seconds. Here we go, Obi-Wan said, gritting his teeth. Floater on the right approaching, Sarasi rapped out. We must have turned up on scanners. Obi-Wan cut sharply to the left, then veered right again. Surprised to see a starfighter heading straight for it, the floater turned sharply downward, firing at the same time. Obi-Wan made a minute adjustment that had caused the ship to turn and the missile to harmlessly fall to his left. It crashed outside the city walls, causing an explosion. They won't do that very often, Sarasi noted. They could level a building once we get over the city. They'll probably use smaller firepower, Neild agreed. We have to do this without blasting them out of the sky, Sarasi said worriedly. We have to show them that our ultimate goal is peace. That's my job, Obi-Wan said. The tower's in range. Let's blast it. Another floater approached from the left, and he could see others taking to the air like a flock of insects, probably from the Don military headquarters in the distance. Obi-Wan calculated the slower speed of the floaters. He had to stay level long enough for Sarasi and Neild to aim. He should have just enough time. He opened the firing panel for Neild. Bracing himself against the hull of the starfighter, Neild aimed his laser cannon. Sarasi waited, her fingers on her own control stick. Now! Obi-Wan shouted, zooming closer to the deflection tower. Sarasi and Neild fired the cannons. As soon as the projectiles were away, Obi-Wan pushed the engines to full power and climbed above the floater heading for his left flank. Blaster fire followed him. He took a small hit on his wing, but not enough to damage the craft. Both Sarasi and Neild scored a direct hit on the tower. Obi-Wan felt the vibration of the blast ripple against the starfighter's hull. The floater rocked as it rode the wind's vibrations, the driver struggling to retain control. The particle shield was briefly visible, then fractured in a shower of blue-tinged energy atoms. Obi-Wan, Sarasi, and Neild cheered, even as Obi-Wan circled around to hit the next tower. Now the military floaters were almost on him. 7 floaters, Sarasi said, counting. Her face creased in worry. Can we do this, Obi-Wan? If we do it fast. Can you aim upside down? Obi-Wan asked, hovering over the floater's range. Sarasi grinned. No problem. Neild positioned his laser cannon. Do it. Obi-Wan pushed the engines. The starfighter rocketed down through the sky at full speed. He knew that technically he was going too fast for this altitude, but he also knew he could handle the craft, and there was no one in the co-pilot seat to remind him of star aviation rules or warn him of the dangers. Exhilaration raced through him. For the first time in his life, he had no one to answer to. There were no Jedi rules or superior wisdom aboard this ship.
He zigzagged on the descent, pushing the ship as much as he dared. The floaters hung back and fired, afraid of colliding with the starship. Using the Force as a guide, Obi-Wan was able to avoid the worst fire. As he got closer, the speeders grew more daring. One came at him dead on, firing as it went. "Ready?" Obi-Wan shouted. At the last moment, he flipped the starfighter over and dived under the floater, maneuvering the craft so it had a clear shot at the tower. Neild and Sarasi fired. The deflection tower blew, scattering metal in parts. Obi-Wan flipped the starfighter right side up and climbed at top speed. The floaters frantically dived to avoid getting hit. "Everyone okay?" Obi-Wan asked. "Dizzy, but okay," Sarasi said, wiping sweat off her forehead. "That was incredible flying." "Okay, follow the wall," Neild directed. "We'll hit the towers one by one around the perimeter." The military floaters pursued them, but they could not fly as high or go as fast as the starfighter. More floaters joined the chase as they flew. To hit each deflection tower, Obi-Wan had to practice the same too-fast maneuvering to avoid being blasted by the speeders or colliding with them. Their advantage was the speed and agility of the starfighter and the incredible accuracy of Sarasi and Neild. One by one, they destroyed each tower, the speeders hard on their flank. The speeders tried to capture Obi-Wan in a pincer movement, but he was too quick for them. When they saw the last tower go up, the three let out a whoop of exultation. Sarasi leaned over and hugged Obi-Wan. Neild pounded him on the back. "I knew we could count on you, friend," he said joyfully. He checked his laser cannon. "We have plenty of firepower left. What do you say we blow the halls of evidence into nanospecks?" Sarasi frowned. "Now? But Neild, we need to get back. We have to hit both Melita and Don for peace negotiations while they're weak. And besides, there could be people inside," Obi-Wan pointed out. Sarasi looked at Neild. "We said we would do this without taking a life." Neild bit his lip as he glanced out the spaceport down to the surface of Zihava. "The sooner those halls of hate are blown up, the sooner everyone on this planet can breathe again," he murmured. "I despise everything they stand for." "I know," Sarasi said. "So do I. But let's take one step at a time." "All right," Neild agreed reluctantly. "But let's do one last thing. Before we land, let's do a quick loop over the countryside." Dila was waiting to pass the message that the perimeter shields had been blown. The scavenger young should be mobilizing. Obi-Wan flew in widening circles over the countryside. Everywhere they saw young people, boys and girls, streaming out from farms and villages and woods. They were already beginning to clog the road into Zihava. Some rode on battered land speeders or souped-up turbo tractors. Those who walked formed columns, marching in military style. When they saw the starfighter overhead, they waved and shouted greetings that three could not hear. Obi-Wan dipped his wings in a return salute. Tears stood in Sarasi's eyes. "I will never forget this day," she said, "and I will never forget what you did for us, Obi-Wan Kenobi." Obi-Wan turned the starfighter back toward the landing area. He didn't care how angry Qui-Gon was, or if he got sent back to the temple. This moment was worth it. Chapter 16. Qui-Gon had woken early and checked on Tall. She was sleeping deeply. That was good. Sleep was the best healer until he could get her to Coruscant. He saw that Obi-Wan had disappeared, along with Neild and Sarasi. No doubt he wanted a last outing with his friends before he left. Qui-Gon would let it pass. He knew it was hard for the boy to leave them. And he had a plan of his own. He had asked a quiet girl named Roni to watch over Tall. Then he traveled through the tunnels to the route he had mapped out last night, slipping away while the rest of the young were celebrating their victory. When he emerged above ground in the abandoned neighborhood at the border of Melita and Don territory, it was still dark. A few stars still twinkled in the navy sky that shaded to gray at the horizon. Qui-Gon had waited in the alley until he was sure all the people he'd invited had arrived. Then he walked to the partially bombed-out building on the corner. Last night he'd sent a note to Wihudi by one of the young messengers. He had asked for a meeting between the Melita Council and the Don Council. He had suggested that it was in their best interest to attend. He had news of the young that they must know. Until now, he hadn't been sure if anyone would show up. He still wasn't sure if one side or the other would try to capture him. It was a desperate gamble. He was prepared for anything, but he had to make a last try for peace before he left Melita Don. He had seen the heartbreak on Obi-Wan's face. He would do it for his Padawan. Near a broken window, he paused to listen for a moment. "And where is the Jedi?" a voice asked coldly. "If this is another dirty Melita trick, I swear by the honored memory of our martyrs that we will retaliate." "A dirty Don trick, more likely." Qui-Gon recognized Wihadi's voice. "For it's a coward's trick, worthy of your worthless ancestors, to lure your enemy to a meeting under false pretenses. Our troops can be here in seconds." "And what will they do? Throw pebbles?" The other voice was amused. "Didn't the Melita blow up their own weapon stores, fearing the attacking Don?" "And didn't the Don allow their own stores to be stolen right under their noses?" Wihadi snapped. Qui-Gon knew it was time for him to enter. He climbed over a half-demolished wall. The Melita council members stood on one side of the room, heavily armed and dressed in plastoid armor. The Don stood on the opposite side, almost identically dressed and armed. Each member of each group bore scars and signs of healed wounds. Several were missing limbs, or breathed through breath masks. It was hard to tell the two ravaged groups apart. "No tricks, no stratagems," Qui-Gon said, striding to the middle of the room. "And if Melita and Don will cooperate, I won't take up too much time, either." The Don Council members looked as skeptical as the Melita, Qui-Gon thought as he surveyed the room. At least the two groups had something in common: distrust. "What news of the young have you brought us?" Wihadi asked impatiently. "And why should we care what children do?" an elder Don asked contemptuously. "Because yesterday they made you look like fools," Qui-Gon answered mildly. He waited out the indrawn breaths and looks of avid hatred directed his way. "And on a more practical note, they have stolen most of your weapons," he added. "They have asked for disarmament, and you have ignored them. Obviously they are quite capable of getting what they want." "All we have to do is walk in and take back our weapons," the Don leader said, rasping through a breath mask. "Candy from a baby." "I warn you," Qui-Gon said, turning to catch the eye of everyone in the room. "Do not underestimate the young. They have learned how to fight from you. They have learned determination from you, and they have their own ideas." "Is this what you brought us here to hear?" the Don leader growled. "If so, I have heard enough." "For once I agree with Goonie," Wihadi said, referring to the Don in the breath mask. "This is a waste of time." "I must urge you to reconsider," Qui-Gon said. "If you form a coalition government, you might be able to take control of Zihava, and thus of Melita Don. If not, the young will win this war. They will end up ruling their elders, and though their aims are pure, I fear for the costs that will bring." Wihadi started from the room, followed by Melita leaders. "Join with the Don? You're dreaming." Quickly, Goonie followed suit, as though he did not want the Melita to be the first to leave. The other Don followed on his heels. Unthinkable! Suddenly, the sound of an explosion caused the remaining windows to vibrate. The Don and Melita looked at each other. "This is a trick!" Wihadi roared. "The foul Don are attacking us!" "The detestable Melita are attacking!" Goonie cried at the same time. "Fiends!" Qui-Gon strode to the window. He looked out, but could see nothing. As he scanned the area, another explosion ripped through the silence. It had come from the Don sector, he calculated, but what could it have been? In the next second, Goonie's comlink began to beep. The elder Don hurried to a corner to take the message in private. While Goonie listened, his back to the room, Qui-Gon began to worry. Obi-Wan had disappeared that morning. He hoped his Padawan wasn't involved in whatever was going on. Using the Force, he tried to establish a connection with Obi-Wan, but he could feel nothing. No distress, no confusion, no assurance. Only a void. When Goonie turned back to the group, he looked shaken. Reports have come in that 2 deflection towers have been blown in the Don sector. One of the Don warriors went for his weapon. I knew it. The filthy Melita. "No!" Goonie cried hoarsely. "It was the young." Slowly, the Don's hand fell to his side. The Melita who'd begun to reach for his weapon stopped as well. A babble of conversation rose. "Those children could not do it on their own. The deplorable Melita are behind this," one of the Don council members shouted. "The lying Don are always quick to accuse without facts," a Melita roared back. Qui-Gon leaned against the sill and waited out the argument. Sometimes it was better to sit back and wait for events to unfold. Comlinks began to beep. Melita and Don alike spoke into them, their faces registering shock. Reports flooded in from both sides. One by one, the deflection towers went down, first on the perimeter, then in the center. The explosions got closer as the last towers were blown. "The young are pouring in from the countryside," Goonie reported, a look of amazement on his face. "The city is now open, defenseless, and they are armed." Melita and Don faced each other. Now they knew the threat that faced them was serious. "Do you see now that you must join together?" Qui-Gon asked quietly. "The young only want peace. You can give it to them. Don't you want to rebuild your city?" "They say they want peace, but they wage war," Wihadi said contemptuously. "Well, we can give them a war to make our ancestors proud. We may have lost some weapons, but we are not defenseless." "And we have weapons remaining as well," Adon said quickly. "Shipments are arriving this very afternoon from our stores outside the city." "They will collapse at any sign of resistance," a Melita woman chimed in. "We can fight them." "But not together," Wihadi said. "The glorious Melita can defeat them without Don help." "For once, do not overestimate yourselves," Qui-Gon spoke sharply. "You don't have weapons. You don't have air support. You have an army made of elders and the wounded. Think of what you're saying. There are thousands of them." Both sides of the room grew quiet. Wihadi and Goonie exchanged a glance. Qui-Gon glimpsed surrender underneath the sizzling distrust. "Perhaps the Jedi is right," Goonie said reluctantly. "I see only one way to defeat them. We must join our armies and weapons, but the Jedi must lead us." Wihadi nodded slowly. "It's the only way we can be sure the Don will not turn on us once the battle is won." "It is our only assurance also," Goonie said. "We cannot trust the word of the Melita." Qui-Gon shook his head. "I did not come here to lead you into battle. I came here to urge you to find a way toward peace." "But there is no peace," Wihadi cried. "The young have drawn the battle lines." "These are your children," Qui-Gon cried out. He had lost his patience in the face of the cruel obstinacy of both sides. He controlled his voice and went on. "I, for one, will not kill children. Why are you so willing to do so?" He turned to Wihadi. "What about Sarasi? Are you willing to march into battle against your own daughter?" Wihadi paled, his clenched fist uncurled. "My grandson Rika is underground," Goonie said. "I have not seen my Dila in 2 years," a woman Melita said quietly. Other Don and Melita looked uncertain. There was a long pause. "All right," Wihadi said at last. "If you will be our emissary, we will open talks with the young." Goonie nodded. The Don agreed. "You are right, Qui-Gon. We cannot wage war against our children." Chapter 17. "We will not meet with them," Neil told Qui-Gon furiously. "I know what their promises are worth. They agreed to meet as a diversion. They will tell us we must disarm, and then the fighting will begin again. This surrender is too soon. If we relent, they'll think we're weak." "They know you have backed them into a corner," Qui-Gon argued. "They're willing to talk. You succeeded, Neil. Now take your victory." Sarasi crossed her arms. "We did not succeed by being fools, Qui-Gon." Qui-Gon turned away with a sigh. He'd been arguing with Sarasi and Neil since he'd returned. It had done no good. It was out of his hands anyway. Obi-Wan sat at the makeshift table, watching. He hadn't offered an opinion, or tried to sway Sarasi or Neil. Qui-Gon had noted this with surprise. Obi-Wan had wanted peace on this planet. Why did he stand back now? Once again, when Qui-Gon tried to contact his Padawan, he found a void. Headquarters was now crowded with the boys and girls who had arrived from the country. More congregated above ground, gathered in parks and squares. The young had mobilized, bringing whatever food they had and instituting a supply line. It would take all day to get everyone fed, but they were determined to succeed. "How did you blow the deflection towers?" Qui-Gon asked Neil and Sarasi curiously. It was a question that had been bothering him since he'd heard the news. "You'd have to hit them from the air, but floaters couldn't do that job. You'd need—" Qui-Gon paused. He turned to face Obi-Wan. Slowly, Obi-Wan pushed his chair back. Qui-Gon heard it scrape against the stone floor. And then he stood. He did not fidget or look away. He met Qui-Gon's gaze. "So it was you," Qui-Gon said. "You took the starfighter. You took it knowing it was our only way off the planet. You took it knowing it was the only hope for Tal."
Obi-Wan nodded.
Sarasi and Neild glanced from one Jedi to the other. Sarasi began to speak, but thought better of it. The tension between Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan was private. "Please come with me, Obi-Wan," Qui-Gon said curtly. He led the way to an adjacent tunnel where they could talk privately. He waited a few moments to compose himself. Bitterness had no place here, yet he felt it surge within him. Obi-Wan had broken his trust. He did not know what to say. His emotions swamped him. Qui-Gon recalled his temple training with an effort. He would admonish his Padawan according to Jedi rules. First he would describe the offense. It was the duty of the Master to do so without judgment. Grateful for a guide, Qui-Gon took a deep breath. "You were instructed not to take sides." "Yes," Obi-Wan responded calmly. It was the duty of a Padawan to agree to his fault without argument. "You were instructed to be available to leave at any time," he said. "Yes," Obi-Wan replied. "You were instructed that Tal's health was your first concern, yet you endangered that health by taking our only form of transport on a dangerous mission." "Yes," Obi-Wan agreed. Qui-Gon swallowed painfully. "By doing all this, you not only put Tal at risk, but the peace process on Melita Dawn as well."
Obi-Wan hesitated for the first time.
"I aided the peace process." "That is your interpretation," Qui-Gon interrupted. "It was not your instruction. Your master and Jedi Master Yoda had decided that Jedi intervention at this stage could only prejudice either the Melita or Dawn, thereby sabotaging the peace process. You were told this. Is that true, Obi-Wan?"
"Yes," Obi-Wan admitted. "It is true."
Qui-Gon paused. He gathered himself to deliver the Jedi wisdom of the Master and Padawan relationship. How the rules had evolved over thousands of years. How the Padawan's pledge of obedience had nothing to do with power, but everything to do with the gaining of wisdom and the humility of service. How he was not here to punish Obi-Wan, or even to teach him, but to aid Obi-Wan's own journey in enlightenment until the day he grew to become a Jedi Knight. "I don't care," Obi-Wan said, breaking into his thoughts. "You don't care about what?" Qui-Gon asked, startled. Usually a Padawan was silent after his admission, waiting for the Master to decide on the next step. "I don't care that I broke the rules," Obi-Wan said. "It was right to break them." Qui-Gon took a breath. "And was it right to break my trust?" Obi-Wan nodded. "I'm sorry I had to, but yes." Qui-Gon felt Obi-Wan's words enter him like a blade. He saw in a flash that since he had taken Obi-Wan as his apprentice, he had been waiting for this moment, waiting for the betrayal, the strike. He had hardened his heart, preparing himself for it. And yet he was not prepared at all. "Qui-Gon, you must understand," Obi-Wan said quietly. "I've found something here. All my life I've been told what is right, what is best. The path has been pointed out to me. That was a great gift, and I'm grateful for all I've learned. But here on this world, all those abstractions I've learned suddenly fit into something concrete, something I can see, something real." Obi-Wan gestured back toward the headquarters of the young. "These people feel like my people. This cause feels like my cause. It calls to me like nothing I've ever felt before." Qui-Gon's astonishment turned to grief and anger at himself. Obi-Wan had been swept away. He should have stepped in earlier. He should have remembered that Obi-Wan was just a boy. He chose his words with care. "The situation here is heartbreaking, yes. It is a hard one to walk away from. That's why I tried to resolve it before we left. But walk away we must, Padawan." Obi-Wan's face turned stony. "Obi-Wan," Qui-Gon said gently, "everything you think you found here, you already have. You are a Jedi. What you need is distance and a little time for reflection." "I don't need to reflect," Obi-Wan said stiffly. "That is your choice," Qui-Gon said, "but still, you must accompany me back to the temple. I need to gather some things for Tal in the city. When I return, I expect to find you packed and ready to go." He started back to the main tunnel. Obi-Wan did not move. "Come, Padawan," he said. Reluctantly, Obi-Wan trailed behind him. Qui-Gon felt worry fill him. There was something closed in Obi-Wan, something unmovable, that he had never sensed in his apprentice before. It would be good to return to the temple, where the wisdom of Yoda and the calm surroundings could help Obi-Wan find his center again. Qui-Gon heard a roar from the main tunnel, voices shouting, pounding feet on stone. He quickened his pace and burst into the space, Obi-Wan at his heels. Neild spun around to face them. The offer for negotiation was a trick. The elders have attacked. Chapter 18. Chaos reigned in the tunnels. The passageways were choked with bodies, children desperately trying to escape the battle raging above. Some were wounded. Others hurriedly tried to arm themselves to the counterattack. Hundreds of the young were trapped above in open parks and squares. They needed reinforcements. "We need medics and a supply line for weapons," Sarasi said. "We need to strike back hard," Neild cried. Obi-Wan rushed to huddle with Sarasi and Neild. Qui-Gon saw anguish on all three faces. It was right that his Padawan help while he could, but they had to get Tal off planet immediately. Now it was imperative. Qui-Gon hurried to her side. She was sitting up, listening intently to what was going on around her. He crouched by her side. "I had hoped to go back to the city to find more med supplies and borrow a floater, but I'm afraid that's impossible now. War has broken out, and we must leave immediately." She nodded. "It's all right. I can walk, Qui-Gon. Your medicine has already helped me. I can make it if you guide me." Qui-Gon bent to gather up their things. They had lost their survival packs, but he had gathered supplies over the past few days. He stashed them in a pack Sarasi had given him. When he turned to search for Obi-Wan, the boy was gone. Sarasi and Neild were gone as well. Qui-Gon dropped the pack and searched the adjoining tunnels. He went as far as he could, but he was wasting time. Obi-Wan had probably gone to the surface with Sarasi and Neild. Perhaps he thought that Qui-Gon still needed to gather more supplies, as he had told Obi-Wan. In that case, Obi-Wan might be planning to meet him at the starfighter. The boy had disobeyed him again, but Qui-Gon felt sure Obi-Wan would appear at the starfighter. In any case, he couldn't waste any more time. He gathered his pack, helped Tal to rise, and started through the tunnels to the edge of Zihava. The smell of smoke and the sound of cries were in the air as Obi-Wan, Sarasi, and Neild climbed above ground. They crouched behind a wall for shelter. Starfighters circled overhead, strafing the park where the young had gathered. Children ran for cover or tried to shoot down the ships with shoulder-mounted torpedo launchers. The starfighters were able to stay out of range. "They're wasting ammunition," Neild cried. "They must have flown in the starfighters from another base," Sarasi said. "Or maybe they'd hidden them somewhere we didn't know about. We can't fight them from the ground." Obi-Wan gripped the wall. A starfighter came in low. He saw rapid flashes from the forward gun pod. Blaster fire ripped into the grass. A young girl sprang for cover. Another boy wasn't so lucky. The fire hit him in the leg and he fell. Before Obi-Wan could move, the boy's companion dragged him to safety. Anguish ripped through Obi-Wan. The children were helpless. Sarasi squeezed her eyes shut, as though she couldn't bear to see any more. "We have to stop this," she said numbly. "There's only 3 starfighters," Obi-Wan said intensely, scanning the sky above. "That's enough," Neild said grimly. "We've got to get organized. They're going to drive half of us out of the city if we don't do something." Neild turned to Obi-Wan. "We need your starship again, my friend. We have to fight them in the air. With your skills, we can shoot them down, just like we hit those deflection towers." Stricken, Obi-Wan gazed at his friends. "You said you would not ask me to go against Qui-Gon's orders again." "But everything's changed, Obi-Wan," Sarasi pleaded. "Look around you. Children are dying. We'll lose everything if we can't fight them from the air." Tears ran down Sarasi's cheeks. "Please." Obi-Wan's ears rang with the cries of the terrified children. Even though he was safe behind the wall, he felt as though blaster fire had ripped through his body. He'd been torn in two. Everything he'd known, everything he thought was important had been shattered. His Jedi training lay in pieces at his feet. It meant nothing compared to what was going on around him now. He flinched as a proton torpedo exploded. Dirt sprayed into the air, raining down on their heads. "Obi-Wan!" Neild shouted. "You must choose." Tears snaked down through the grime on Sarasi's face. She didn't speak. Her shoulders shook as a child screamed in pain. Obi-Wan realized he had already chosen. He couldn't turn his back on the suffering. He couldn't turn his back on his friends. Even if it cost him everything, he would give that, and more. "I'll be back," Obi-Wan promised, and took off. Chapter 19. Obi-Wan ran without stopping. He had to get to the ship before Qui-Gon. He did not want a confrontation. If Qui-Gon tried to stop him, what would he do? He pushed aside the thought. He would just have to get there first. Tall would slow Qui-Gon down. But he had underestimated the determination and speed of two Jedi Knights. As he ran down the canyon path, Obi-Wan saw Qui-Gon lifting off the last of the camouflaging branches. Tall must already be aboard. His steps slowed as Qui-Gon caught sight of him. Obi-Wan saw the relief on his master's face. Qui-Gon thought he was coming to return with him to the temple. The Jedi Knight stood by the entrance ramp, waiting. Obi-Wan didn't give Qui-Gon a chance to speak. He could not bear to hear words of welcome. "I'm not here to go with you," he said. "I came for the starfighter." Qui-Gon's look of quiet welcome faded. His features froze into a mask. "Tall is aboard," Qui-Gon said. "I am taking her to Coruscant." "I'll bring the ship back," Obi-Wan tried. "I need it now. If you could wait here." "No," Qui-Gon said angrily. "No, Padawan. I will not make your betrayal easy for you. If you try to take this step, know what a hard one it is." Neither had moved a muscle. Yet Obi-Wan knew that Qui-Gon was just as prepared as he was to fight. The force swirled around him, but it was a disturbed force, neither dark nor light. He tried to tap into it and could not. It was like trying to squeeze a handful of fine sand as it streamed out through the cracks in his fingers. He had no choice. The world around him was dying. He had to save it. He had to fight Qui-Gon. Obi-Wan went for his lightsaber. Qui-Gon moved only a fraction of an instant later. Because of his quickness, his lightsaber activated the same time as Obi-Wan's. Qui-Gon's green beam shot up, glowing in the gray light. Obi-Wan felt his own lightsaber pulse in his hand. Qui-Gon kept his eyes on Obi-Wan. Here was the moment. He had only to step forward and challenge his master. He had only to move one muscle for it to be taken as an offensive move. Then the battle would begin. Obi-Wan met Qui-Gon's gaze and saw the same anguish he felt. He felt something within him crack, and his resolve slowly drained away. He could not do this. Simultaneously, they both lowered their weapons. The lightsabers deactivated with a faint buzzing sound. For a moment, all Obi-Wan heard was the lonesome wind howling through the canyon. "You must choose, Obi-Wan," Qui-Gon told him quietly. "You can go with me now, or stay. Know that if you stay, you are no longer a Jedi." No longer a Jedi. Was he prepared to take that step? Is this what he had come to? The moment spun out, became timeless to Obi-Wan. Time meant nothing. The confrontation with the man he had pledged to study under, learn from, defend, and support suddenly felt unreal. How did he get here? What was he doing? But through his confusion he saw Sarasi's fierce glowing eyes, heard Neild's fervent words. He still smelled the smoke of battle, heard the desperate cries. He saw barricaded streets and elders too blind with hatred to notice they were killing their planet, piece by bloody piece. He saw them killing their own children. He could tell Qui-Gon about the battle he had seen. He could try, but he had tried before. Qui-Gon was right. He must make his choice. Obi-Wan grasped the rock of his conviction and felt his confusion drop away. Here in Melita Dawn, he had met a reality that was stronger than anything he'd known. "I have found something here more important than the Jedi Code," Obi-Wan said slowly. "Something not only worth fighting for, but worth dying for." Obi-Wan handed his lightsaber to Qui-Gon. "You may go, Qui-Gon Jinn, but I will stay." It was as though the words hit Qui-Gon in the face, for he flinched. He stared down at Obi-Wan's lightsaber in his hand, not speaking. A great struggle seemed to go on within the Jedi Knight's powerful body. Obi-Wan had hurt him. He longed to take the words back. He could not. They had been said. He had meant them. Qui-Gon did not look at him. He did not say a word. He turned and strode up the ramp, into the starfighter. Obi-Wan stood back as the engines powered up. The starfighter rose cleanly from the canyon and shot off into the upper atmosphere. He stood watching it until it was out of sight. Then Obi-Wan turned his back. He hurried down the path, back to see Hava and his new life. Sarasi and Neild were waiting. This has been
Star Wars, Jedi Apprentice, The Defenders of the Dead, by Jude Watson. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed my reading of this audiobook and would like to contribute, you can head on over to www.patreon.com/The Expanded Universe Lives Forever. The link is also in the video's description.